Hey everyone, and welcome to Nighttime Stories. I'm here to help you drift off into a peaceful sleep. Let me know where you're watching from. I always love seeing how far these stories reach. Now, get comfortable and relax. When I first started noticing things were off in my apartment, I told myself it was stress. That was the easiest answer, and for a while it worked. I had been putting in long hours at work, staying late into the evenings, coming home so tired I barely remembered locking the door behind me. So when I noticed my hoodie draped over a chair instead of folded on the bed, or the cupboard door hanging open when I could have sworn I had shut it, I chalked it up to fatigue. I even joked to myself that I was living with a ghost, though the truth is that was just my way of avoiding how uneasy it made me feel. There was one night I came home and my sneakers were lined up by the door, not thrown there like I usually left them, but neatly placed side by side like someone had taken care. I stood staring at them for a long time, trying to remember if maybe I had done it myself without thinking. My stomach felt hollow as I tried to convince myself it was nothing. I even nudged them out of line with my foot, like I was daring myself to stop being dramatic. But in the back of my head, the thought gnawed. What if someone else had been in here? It was not like I lived in a high-rise with multiple security doors. My building was old, the kind of place where the locks felt flimsy if you twisted them too hard. I checked every window, every latch, tested the deadbolt 3 times before I went to bed that night. I told myself, if anything was off in the morning, I would call the landlord. That night I woke up around 3 with the worst feeling. You know that moment when you are not sure if you heard something or if your brain just invented a noise as you drifted between dreams. That was how it started. A faint sound, low and steady. I lay frozen in bed, holding my breath, straining to hear. It was breathing. Not mine. Not the dog upstairs that I sometimes heard thumping around. It was too close, too real. A slow inhale, then an exhale, with a faint rasp like someone with a chest cold. My skin prickled as I tried to place it. The sound was not coming from outside, not from the hallway. It was inside my room. I rolled as slowly as I could, my eyes scanning the dark. The closet door was closed, but the sound was coming from there. I felt the air stick in my throat as the reality settled in. Someone was breathing inside my closet. I did not move for what felt like hours. My body screamed at me to run, but my legs were heavy, my chest tight with fear. Finally, I reached for my phone on the nightstand and dialed with shaking hands. Whispering into the receiver, I told the dispatcher that someone was in my apartment, that I could hear them breathing in my closet. When the police arrived, I almost collapsed with relief. They tore through the place, yanked open the closet door, pushed aside the hanging clothes. Nothing. The officer clicked his flashlight up into the corners, tapped on the walls, even crouched to peer at the floorboards. Nothing but dust and a few stray hangers. He gave me a look I could not read, part pity, part annoyance, and told me to call again if I saw anything concrete. After they left, I sat on the edge of the bed with my head in my hands, ashamed of myself. Maybe it really was stress. Maybe I was unraveling. But as the silence settled back into the room, I could not shake the memory of that sound, too steady and deliberate to be my imagination. The next morning only deepened my unease. When I went into the bathroom, my toothbrush was wet. Not damp from rinsing, but wet like it had just been used. I stared at it in the holder, bile rising in my throat, because I knew for certain I had not brushed my teeth yet. My hands shook as I threw it in the trash and grabbed a new one from the pack. The kitchen was no better. I opened the fridge to find that half a carton of eggs was missing, though I had not cooked in days. My leftovers from 2 nights earlier were gone, the container washed and sitting neatly on the drying rack. My chest tightened as I realized what it meant. Someone was not just getting inside my apartment. They were living here. I tore the place apart that day, checking every closet, every cupboard, even the crawl space panel in the hallway that I had never touched before. Nothing. Dust. Cobwebs, stale air. I wanted to believe I was safe again, but the dread never really left. That night I slept with the lights on, clutching the dog's old baseball bat I had found in the storage box by the door. For the next few days, I tried to keep myself sane by documenting everything. I snapped photos of where I left things, lined up shoes deliberately, even taped a piece of paper over the closet door so I would know if it was opened. Each morning I checked. At first, everything stayed as I had left it. My shoulders started to loosen, my heart slowed. Maybe the police had scared whoever it was away. Maybe it was over. But then the paper on the closet door was gone. Not torn, not hanging by a piece of tape. Gone. And the closet was closed exactly how I had left it. I stood staring at the door for what felt like forever. The baseball bat slick in my hand. The silence in the room was suffocating. I forced myself to step closer, every nerve in my body screaming at me to stop. I pressed my ear to the wood. That was when I heard it again, the slow, steady sound of someone else breathing, just inches away on the other side. The night after I heard the breathing again, I did not sleep at all. I sat upright in bed with every light on, the baseball bat across my lap, my phone clutched in my hand with the emergency number ready. I thought about calling again right then, telling them the paper was gone, telling them the breathing was back, but I knew how it would go. They would send someone, the closet would look empty again, and I would be left staring at the same closed door with no answers. The weight of being dismissed the first time had already worn me down. I did not think I could stand another look that suggested I was just imagining it. By morning my body felt heavy, my eyes burning from staying open all night. The apartment smelled faintly of something I could not place, like sweat and cheap cologne. When I shuffled into the kitchen, there was a dirty plate in the sink. I had not used one in days. The fork balanced on the edge was still damp, as though it had just been rinsed. My chest tightened as I gripped the counter. I was not crazy. Someone was in my apartment. I called in sick to work, unable to face the idea of leaving the place empty. I sat at the kitchen table with a notebook, scribbling down every small thing that felt wrong. My toothbrush, the food, the sneakers by the door, the missing paper on the closet, the breathing. Seeing it all written down made the dread worse. It was not random anymore. It was a pattern. At one point in the afternoon, I caught a faint sound from the bathroom, a creak, soft, like the weight of a foot on tile. I froze in the kitchen chair, every nerve sparking. My dog barked once, sharp and high-pitched, then bolted behind me, his body pressed to my legs. I sat listening, but the sound never came again. That evening I finally gave in and called a locksmith. I told him I needed every lock in the apartment reinforced. He looked at me strangely when I explained that someone might be getting in at night. I could see the doubt in his eyes, but he went about his work quietly, replacing the deadbolt, securing the chain. When he left, I stood there staring at the new lock, trying to breathe easier. It did not help. That night, even with the new locks, I still heard it. The slow, steady breathing from inside the closet. I pressed my ear to the door again, my whole body trembling, and felt the faintest vibration run through the wood, like someone shifting against it. I jumped back, gripping the bat, but I could not bring myself to open it. Not then, not alone. In the morning I called the police again. I told them everything, my voice cracking as I begged them to take me seriously. To their credit, they sent 2 officers this time. They searched every inch of the apartment. One even crouched into the crawlspace access in the hallway, shining his light around for a long time. He came back out covered in dust, shaking his head. "Nobody up there," he said. The other officer gave me a softer look, but it was the same conclusion. Nothing. They left me standing in the doorway, humiliated and more terrified than before. That day I noticed something I had missed. In the corner of the living room, near the wall vent, a small pile of crumbs sat neatly on the floor, not spilled, not scattered, placed. Like someone had been eating quietly and brushed the remains into one spot. I crouched there, staring at it, my heart pounding. My dog sniffed the pile, whimpered, and backed away. I started moving through the apartment differently after that. Every room I entered, I checked the corners first. Every closet door, I touched the knob before I let myself relax. I began leaving little traps, placing pennies on the tops of doors, sprinkling flour lightly near the closet to see if it was disturbed. By nightfall I was exhausted, too strung out to think clearly. That night I slept on the couch, telling myself it was safer than my bed. I set the baseball bat beside me, the flashlight in my hand. The dog curled against me, trembling. At some point I must have drifted off, because I woke to the sound of faint clattering in the kitchen. My heart lurched. I sat up, gripping the flashlight, straining to hear. The sound came again, a drawer sliding closed, soft footsteps on tile. My throat closed as I listened. Someone was in my kitchen. I wanted to call the police, but I was too afraid to move. I lay frozen, my body stiff, ears straining. After a long silence, I heard it, the sound of the refrigerator opening. A faint crack of light spilled under the kitchen door into the living room. My chest heaved as I realized someone was calmly rummaging through my fridge while I sat paralyzed 10 feet away. I must have made a sound, a small whimper or the creak of the couch, because the refrigerator door slammed shut. The light vanished. Silence pressed down on me, thick and unbearable. I did not move until the first pale glow of dawn slid through the blinds. When I finally forced myself to check the kitchen, the floor was covered in wet footprints, small, bare, and leading straight back toward the closet. I stood staring at the trail, my whole body shaking. My dog barked once, then bolted into the bedroom, refusing to come back out. I followed the prints with my eyes, my stomach churning, until I saw where they ended, right at the closet door. I pressed my hand to the knob. It was warm. I did not open the closet that morning. My hand lingered on the knob until it slicked with sweat, but I could not force myself to turn it. I felt that if I pulled it open, the last layer of denial I had been clinging to would crumble, and then there would be no going back. I left the door closed, walked backward until I hit the wall, and slid down it, shaking. My dog stayed hidden in the bedroom, too frightened to come back into the kitchen. The apartment felt full, like the air was too heavy, as if something unseen pressed against my skin with every breath. I spent that entire day in a fog. Every noise was amplified. The hum of the fridge, the tick of the clock, even the faint scratching of tree branches outside felt sharper, closer. I could not concentrate on anything. My notebook lay open on the table with half-finished lists and scribbles, but I could not bring myself to write. My body was too keyed up, waiting for another sound, another breath. By afternoon I knew I could not stay there another night without answers. The police would not help me. The landlord brushed me off, and I could not keep waking up to evidence that someone had been inches away from me as I slept. I told myself I would open the closet before the day was done, no matter what I found inside. To steady my nerves, I ran errands. I bought a new lock for the bedroom door, more duct tape, and a long kitchen knife I convinced myself was just for cooking. I wandered the aisles in a daze, people brushing past me while I rehearsed what I would do. Open the closet fast, shine the flashlight, be ready to swing if anything moved. It felt absurd, like I was preparing for some kind of battle, but the fear buzzing in my veins made it feel deadly serious. When I got back, the apartment was still, too still. My dog barked once from the bedroom, a thin, nervous sound. I dropped the bags on the counter, gripped the baseball bat in one hand, and stood in front of the closet door. I peeled a strip of duct tape from the roll and smoothed it across the crack, just like I had done before. This time, I wanted to know if it would be disturbed while I was watching. I sat cross-legged on the floor a few feet away, bat across my lap, flashlight ready. The afternoon light filtered through the blinds, streaking the room in thin lines of gold, but the closet stayed a flat, dark shape in front of me. An hour passed, then another. My legs ached, my back stiffened, but I did not move. My dog eventually crept out of the bedroom and curled beside me, his eyes locked on the closet door. Just after dusk, it happened. The tape shivered. A faint bulge pressed outward, then released. My chest seized as I gripped the bat tighter, every nerve screaming. Another bulge followed, slow and deliberate, like fingers testing the barrier. The tape peeled away with a faint ripping sound, curling toward the floor. I surged forward before I could lose my nerve. I yanked the door open and flicked on the flashlight, the beam shaking so wildly that it lit up only pieces of what was inside. Hangers, shoes, a stack of boxes. Nothing moved. I dropped to my knees and angled the light down. That was when I saw it. An opening at the back wall, no bigger than a small hatch, the panel slightly ajar. The air that leaked from the gap smelled foul, a mix of sweat, mildew, and something sour I could not name. My stomach lurched as I pulled the panel wide. A crawl space stretched back into the shadows, low and narrow, the floor covered in dust and crumpled food wrappers. My flashlight beam caught the glint of something metallic, an old tin can with a spoon sticking out, a half-empty water bottle, scraps of bread hardened to stone. My throat closed as I crawled closer, the bat dragging beside me. Then I saw them, photographs, dozens of them, pinned haphazardly against the wood beams. Every single one was of me. Sleeping on the couch, cooking in the kitchen, sitting at the table with my head in my hands. Some were grainy, some clearer, but all of them captured me in private moments I had never known were being watched. I staggered back, bile rising in my throat. My hands shook so violently that the flashlight beam wobbled over the walls, revealing more, spirals of handwriting scrawled in black marker. Notes about when I left for work, what time I came home, when I showered, what I ate. Whole pages dedicated to my schedule, my habits, my movements, all written with unsettling precision. The sound of shuffling came from deeper in the crawl space, just beyond the edge of the light. I froze, my heart hammering so hard it hurt. The shuffling grew louder, closer. My body screamed at me to run, but my legs felt rooted to the spot. My dog barked frantically, the sound echoing in the small space. A figure emerged slowly from the shadows. A man, filthy, his hair matted, his eyes sunken and wide. He was thin to the point of sickness, his clothes ragged, his hands clutching the beams to drag himself forward. His lips curled into a smile that sent ice through my veins. "You should not have found me," he rasped. His voice was low, hoarse, like he had not spoken in years. I scrambled backward, the bat slipping from my grip as my dog lunged, teeth snapping. The man hissed, recoiling into the shadows, his eyes gleaming in the flashlight beam. I kicked the panel shut, slammed the closet door, and pressed my whole weight against it, sobbing as my dog barked beside me. For hours I stayed there, my body trembling, the bat clutched so tightly in my hands that my knuckles ached. I could hear him inside, moving, shifting, scratching at the walls. Every sound made me flinch, every creak sent my heart racing. When the first light of morning crept through the blinds, the apartment fell silent. I did not open the door. I did not dare. I just sat slumped against it, my body numb, my mind blank. At some point, exhaustion dragged me into a shallow, restless sleep. I dreamed of eyes watching me from every shadow, of hands reaching from the darkness to grab my throat. When I woke, the sun was high, and the apartment was deathly quiet. But the smell lingered, foul and heavy, seeping from the crack under the closet door. I knew then that this was not over. By the time the sun was high enough to wash the walls in pale light, I had already dialed the police. My voice cracked when I tried to explain. I said there was a man in my crawl space, that I had seen him with my own eyes, that I had photographs to prove it. The dispatcher told me to stay on the line, to lock myself in another room if I could. I sat pressed against the closet door until I heard the pounding of boots in the hallway. When the officers arrived, I nearly broke down. I shoved the door open for them, babbling about the crawl space, the photos, the smell. They moved quickly, weapons drawn, their faces grim. One of them yanked the closet door wide while the other trained his flashlight on the open hatch. For a long moment, the only sound was the beam buzzing faintly as it cut across the dust. Then the smell hit them too. One of the officers coughed, muttered something under his breath. He crouched low, ducked his head, and crawled inside. I sat on the floor, clutching my dog, waiting, every muscle tight. When he came back out, his face was pale. He carried a stack of papers, curled and smeared with dirt. He laid them on the floor in front of me. They were more notes, more obsessive scribbles about my life. Whole pages covered in shaky handwriting describing when I turned out the lights, how often I coughed in my sleep, the way I sometimes talked to myself when I cooked. "There's a nest back there," he said quietly. "Blankets, food containers. He's been living up there a while." The other officer stood with his hand pressed to the closet frame, his jaw tight. "He's not there now," he added. The words rattled in my head, "not there now," which meant he had slipped away while I was sitting terrified on the other side of the door. My stomach churned. They searched the entire building. Neighbors opened their doors, sleepy and confused, but no one had seen anyone leave. They swept the basement, the stairwell, even the roof. Nothing. It was as though he had dissolved into the walls. One officer stayed behind to take my statement. His notepad filled quickly as I stumbled through the details. The toothbrush, the food, the paper missing from the closet, the footprints leading back inside. I showed him the photographs pinned inside the crawl space. He nodded slowly, his face unreadable, then told me something I will never forget. "We've seen this before," he said quietly. "Not common, but it happens. People slipping into empty spaces, crawl spaces, attics, living off scraps, sometimes for weeks, even months. You're lucky you found him when you did." Lucky. The word felt like a joke. I did not feel lucky. I felt violated in a way I did not have words for. I had been watched in my most private moments, my life catalogued in detail by someone hiding feet above my head. I shivered as the officer handed me back the notes. "Keep these for the report," he said. They left soon after, promising to increase patrols in the area, telling me to call if I noticed anything else. I stood in the middle of the living room as the silence crept back, heavier than before. My dog whimpered at my feet, his body trembling. For the rest of that day, I could not stop pacing. Every creak of the floorboards made me jump. I kept glancing at the closet, half expecting the panel to burst open. My chest tightened whenever the apartment went too quiet. I tried turning on the television, the radio, anything to drown out the silence, but it did not help. That night, I dragged the couch across the room and wedged it against the closet door. I stacked chairs on top, balanced pots and pans that would crash if the door moved. I lay on the floor beside the barricade, baseball bat across my chest, the knife under my pillow, my dog curled against me, his ears pricked. Sleep never came. Around 2 a.m, I heard a faint scratching above my head, not inside the closet, not in the crawl space, in the ceiling, near the light fixture. My heart slammed in my chest as I stared up, waiting for the plaster to crack. The scratching went on for minutes, then stopped. By dawn, my eyes were bloodshot, my throat dry from holding back cries. I made coffee I did not drink, my hands trembling too badly to hold the mug. I told myself I needed to leave. I could not stay in that apartment another day. I packed a bag with clothes, my wallet, and the dog's leash. But when I opened the door to leave, something stopped me cold. There was an envelope on the floor, pushed just inside. My name was scrawled across it in uneven letters. I bent down, my knees weak, and slid it open. Inside was a single photograph. It was me, curled on the floor with the bat across my chest, sleeping fitfully in the dim light. The angle was from above, from the ceiling. I dropped it, my body shaking violently, bile burning in my throat. The barricade was still in place, the closet door untouched, but somehow he had taken the photo. I slammed the apartment door shut, locked it twice, and sat shaking against it with tears burning in my eyes. I do not remember the rest of that day clearly. The hours blur together into a haze of fear and exhaustion. I know I walked from room to room, checking locks, closing curtains, searching the corners like I expected him to leap out. I know I clutched my phone so hard that my fingers cramped. I know my dog barked at the ceiling until his voice gave out. By the time night fell again, I was a wreck. I sat in the living room with the lights blazing, the bat across my lap, my phone on the table. Every sound made me flinch. The building groaned, pipes rattled, wind pressed against the windows, and each noise felt like a warning. I kept telling myself I should leave, should run, should find a hotel or sleep in my car. But the idea of walking down the hallway, of turning my back to the crawl space, was unbearable. What if he slipped out as I left? What if he followed me? So I stayed, trembling in the chair, waiting for the sun to rise again. My dog pressed against my leg, his body quivering, his eyes locked on the ceiling. That was the longest night of my life. By the time the sun came up after that endless night, I felt like a shell of myself. My body was there, but my mind kept slipping in and out, drifting between panic and exhaustion. I had not slept in 2 days, maybe more if you counted the scraps of shallow dozing that barely qualified as rest. My dog stayed close, his ears twitching at every sound, his eyes darting up toward the ceiling. I knew I could not keep living like this, but I also knew I could not just walk away without understanding what I was dealing with. The police had done their sweep, and they had not found him. If he was still in the building, then it was up to me to prove it. That thought alone made my stomach twist, but the photograph shoved under my door had burned through whatever scraps of denial I had left. Someone had been in my ceiling. Someone had leaned over me while I slept. And the police had missed him. I waited until afternoon, when the light through the blinds was strongest and my courage had climbed enough to get me off the couch. I grabbed the bat and a flashlight, then forced myself back to the closet. The barricade was still in place, the chairs stacked precariously, the pots ready to clatter if anyone tried to force the door. I moved it all aside slowly, the scrape of wood against wood, making my chest seize with dread. When I opened the closet and pulled back the hatch to the crawl space, the smell hit me again, that mix of sweat and rot and stale food that clung to the air like it was baked into the wood. I gagged, covered my mouth with my sleeve, and aimed the flashlight inside. The beam lit the same piles of wrappers and cans, the same rough nest of blankets shoved into the corner. But I noticed something I had not seen before, another panel, smaller and more crude, tucked against the far wall. I crawled forward on my elbows, the bat dragging behind me. Dust coated my hands and knees, choking me with every movement. My dog barked sharply from the closet, his voice echoing through the narrow space, but I kept going until I reached the panel. It was loose, just resting against the frame. I nudged it aside with the flashlight, and the beam spilled into another section of the crawl space. That was when I found them. Stacks of journals, bound with string, the covers grimy and curling at the edges. A pile of photographs, more than I had seen before, spilling across the floor. They were all of me, sitting on the toilet, brushing my teeth, changing clothes, sleeping with my mouth open, head tilted back. Some of them were so close that I could see the pores on my skin, the lines of my lips. I dropped the bat as my hands shook, picking up one photo after another, my stomach dropping further each time. Some of them were from weeks ago, maybe longer, which meant he had been here the entire time I had lived in the apartment, maybe even before. I had no idea how many nights I had been watched, how many moments of privacy had been stolen. I flipped open one of the journals, my hands trembling so badly I could barely keep the pages steady. The handwriting was cramped, uneven, but legible. Page after page described me in chilling detail. What I ate, what time I went to bed, what shows I watched. The entries were written like devotion, like scripture. Some pages repeated the same phrases over and over. She sleeps. She eats. She walks. Other pages were more personal. She looks sad today. She talked to herself again. She did not notice me. One entry made my skin crawl so badly that I nearly dropped the notebook. It read, "She is starting to hear me breathe. She is getting close." I stuffed the journal back into the pile and backed away, my throat burning. My flashlight beam swept across the wall, catching on something else. Drawings, crude, childlike sketches of me. Stick figure outlines with my hair, my clothes, always in the same rooms. One drawing showed me curled on the couch with the bat in my hands, the same position I had slept in the night before. My whole body shook as I scrambled backward, dragging the bat with me. I slammed the panel closed, shut the hatch, and leaned against the closet door, gasping like I had run miles. My dog pressed against me, whining, his tail tucked. I thought about calling the police again, but I knew how it would go. They would come, look, and maybe take the journals for evidence. They would shake their heads and say they could not find him. And then I would be alone again, waiting for the scratching in the walls. That night I could not bring myself to sleep in the apartment. I packed a bag and drove aimlessly until I ended up at a cheap motel near the highway. I sat on the bed staring at the floral bedspread, my dog curled beside me, the journals burning in my mind. I had left them behind, too afraid to carry them out, but their words clung to me. I could not shake the thought that he might still be in there, watching the empty apartment, waiting for me to return. But the worst part was the feeling that he knew I had found his secrets. The envelope with the photo had been a warning. The journals had been something I was never meant to see, and now he knew I had crossed that line. I did not sleep at the motel either. I lay on my side with the television humming faintly, staring at the door. Every time a car passed on the highway, headlights swept across the curtains and made my chest seize. My dog growled once, low and deep, then buried his head against me like he did not want to see. When morning finally came, I drove back to the apartment just long enough to grab more clothes and food. The place felt dead when I walked in, the air heavy and stale. Nothing looked disturbed, but that did not comfort me. I could not shake the certainty that he was still inside, pressed against the walls, listening to my every step. I told myself I would move. That was the only answer. Pack everything, leave, find somewhere new. But as I sat in the kitchen shoving things into boxes, I found something that made my stomach drop all over again. On the table was a single sheet of paper, torn from one of the journals. The words written in uneven scrawl read, "Do not leave me." I crumpled it in my fist, my body shaking so badly I could barely breathe. He was still there, and he knew. The day I found that sheet of paper on my kitchen table with the words, "Do not leave me," something inside me snapped. Fear had been eating at me for weeks, maybe months if I was honest, but that note burned through the last shred of patience I had left. It was not just that he had written it. It was that he had placed it where he knew I would find it. A message from inside my own walls, left on the same surface where I ate my meals and tried to live like a normal person. That paper was the proof I had been waiting for, but it was also the breaking point. I packed what I could carry. Clothes, toiletries, my laptop, the dog's things, everything else I left behind. The thought of moving through the closet again to retrieve the journals made my stomach lurch, and I could not bear to touch another one of those photographs. It felt like handling poison. I locked the door behind me out of habit, even though I knew the locks were pointless. If he had lived there this long, he had ways in and out that I would never understand. I drove until I reached my sister's place 2 towns over. I had called her on the way, my voice shaking as I tried to explain. She did not laugh, did not dismiss me. She just told me to come, that I could stay as long as I needed. When I pulled into her driveway, I cried for the first time since this started. Tears of relief, fear, grief for the life I thought I had been living. For the first week at her place, I barely left the guest room. I slept in short bursts, waking up drenched in sweat, convinced I heard scratching in the walls. My dog stayed pressed against me, never letting me out of his sight. I told myself I was safe here, that he could not have followed me, but my body refused to believe it. Every time the floor creaked, my chest tightened. Every time the house settled, I sat upright in bed, waiting. Eventually, I contacted the landlord and told him I was breaking the lease. I said nothing about the man in the closet. I just told him there were safety issues I could not live with. He argued at first, threatened fees and penalties, but I did not care. I was never going back, not even to collect the rest of my things. I could live without them. The police called me once more. They said they had checked the apartment again and found nothing, no sign of anyone. They asked if I wanted to file a restraining order, but against who? I never even got a name. I never saw an ID, never heard anything more than a rasped sentence. They did not seem to grasp the weight of it. To them, it was just another case of someone squatting, someone desperate enough to hide in the walls. But to me, it was a violation so deep it felt like it had rewired my brain. It took months before I stopped waking at every noise. Even now, writing this, I keep glancing at the corners of the room, half expecting to see a panel shift or a hatch creak open. My sister tried to comfort me, told me he was gone, that I was safe. But the truth is, safety feels like a lie now. Once you realize someone can slip into the fabric of your life so easily, live alongside you without your knowledge, it changes the way you see everything. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, I still wake to the sound of breathing. Not loud, not obvious, just faint enough to make me doubt myself. I lie there holding my breath, straining to hear, until my chest aches. Most nights it is nothing, just my imagination replaying the worst of it. But there are times when I swear it is real. When I swear I feel the air shift, like lungs drawing in and out somewhere close by. I do not tell people about this anymore. The few friends I tried to confide in gave me the same look the first officers did, pity mixed with disbelief. I cannot stand that look. It makes me feel more alone than anything. So I carry it with me in silence, hoping that putting these words down at least helps me breathe. I keep the bat by my bed still. I know it would not do much against someone willing to crawl through walls and ceilings, but the weight of it comforts me. My dog still growls at corners sometimes, sudden and sharp, then goes back to sleep like nothing happened. I wonder if he remembers more than I do, if he still senses things I cannot. What unsettles me the most is not the photographs or the journals or even the memory of his sunken face leering out of the crawl space. What unsettles me is the thought that I never caught him. He slipped away in the time it took me to call the police, and no one ever found him, which means he could be anywhere now, in someone else's apartment, in someone else's crawl space, watching them the way he watched me. I like to think leaving broke the connection, that he wanted me, not just anyone, that by walking away, I ended it. But deep down, I do not believe that. Deep down, I think he is still out there, watching someone else breathe, writing their life down in shaky handwriting. Maybe he never stopped watching me. Maybe he is still nearby, just waiting for me to let my guard down again. I do not know if that is paranoia or instinct, but I know one thing. I will never feel truly alone in a room again. The walls are not just walls to me anymore. They are hiding places. They are eyes. So if you ever feel like something in your apartment is off, if you hear a sound you cannot explain or find things moved when you are sure you left them in place, do not dismiss it. Do not laugh it off. Check your closets. Check your crawl spaces. And if you find nothing, do not take that as comfort. Take it as a warning. Because I found him. And I got away. But I still do not feel safe. I do not think I ever will. I first saw her on a Tuesday. It was early, probably 5:30 in the morning. I'd gotten in the habit of waking up before the kids, not to be productive, but because I liked the quiet. There's this weird, weightless window of time before the rest of the world kicks on. No emails, no cartoons, no toast burning in the background, just stillness. That morning, I poured myself a cup of coffee and stood at the kitchen window like I always do, looking out over the backyard. That's when I noticed her, just standing there at the back fence. Our yard backs up to a small patch of woods. Nothing dense, just a few skinny trees, some brush, the occasional squirrel. Between the yard and the trees is an old wooden fence about shoulder height. It was here when we moved in. Nothing fancy, just enough to say this part is ours. She was standing on the other side of it, not in the woods, but right at the edge, perfectly still, hands at her sides, wearing what looked like a long coat or maybe a dress, dark brown, like something you'd wear to a church service in the fall. At first I figured she was just passing through, maybe someone's lost aunt or a neighbor cutting across the woods to get somewhere faster. But she didn't move, didn't fidget, didn't seem cold, just stood there, facing the house. She was too far away to make out her expression, but I could tell she wasn't watching the trees or looking around. She was looking straight at our window, at me. I didn't wave or say anything, just stood there with my coffee, watching her, trying to figure out if I should call someone or open the back door. But I didn't want to wake anyone else up, and honestly, I wasn't even sure what I'd report. Eventually, the sky started to brighten. Not full sunrise, but that soft gray blue that means morning's on the way. I looked down to check the time, 5:42, and when I looked up again, she was gone. No rustling, no footsteps, just gone. I stepped outside and looked around, but the woods were still. The grass was wet with dew, no footprints. Weird, but not alarming. Not yet. The next morning, she was back. Same time, 5:30 on the dot. Different outfit this time, a pale green blouse with a tan skirt that hit just below the knee. Her hair was down, neatly combed, almost too neat for that early in the morning. Again, she stood there without moving, just watching the house. This time, I stepped out onto the porch. I didn't go down the steps, just stood there and stared back at her. I thought maybe she'd wave, or speak, or do anything to make this make sense. But she didn't react. She didn't even blink. I raised a hand halfway, not quite a wave, more like a cautious hello, and she still didn't move. When I called out, "Can I help you?" her head tilted just slightly to the right, like she was studying me or recognizing me. That was the moment I felt the first real thread of unease. Not fear, not yet, but something that made me step back into the house without fully realizing I'd done it. I watched her through the window again, waiting to see if she'd leave, or at least shift her weight. She didn't. And just like the day before, as the light started creeping in, she was gone. I told my wife about her that night. Jen laughed at first. "You've got a little fan club forming," she said. But when I told her how long the woman had stood there, how she didn't move or speak, her smile faded. "You think she's homeless?" Jen asked. "Maybe," I said. "But she looks too, put together. Her clothes are always clean, hair brushed. She doesn't have a bag or anything. It's weird." "Should we call someone?" I shrugged. "She's not on our property. That's what I kept coming back to. She wasn't doing anything technically wrong. She was just there. And the next morning, she was there again. 5:30 sharp. This time she wore a red sweater, same length skirt as the day before. Her shoes were always flats, modest, practical, like she dressed for a very specific kind of appointment every day. I stepped outside again. This time, I walked all the way down to the edge of the yard. She didn't move. I stood about 10 feet from her, only the fence between us. Up close, she looked even more ordinary. Early 50s maybe. No visible scars or dirt. No signs of injury. Her eyes were pale, almost colorless in the dawn light. "Why are you here?" I asked. She blinked, once, maybe twice, then said in a quiet, even voice, "I used to live here." Her tone wasn't angry, wasn't sad, just matter of fact. I didn't know what to say. I waited, thinking she'd explain, tell me she grew up here, or that she was confused, but she didn't. She just said, "He said I could come back when I'm ready." I asked, "Who?" But she didn't answer. She turned her head slightly to the left, like she was listening to something deep in the woods, then back at me. And then, as the sky began to brighten, she turned and walked into the trees. No rush, no fear. Just left. That was the first time I felt afraid. Not because of what she did, but because of how calm it all was. That kind of calm only comes from believing you belong somewhere. And I couldn't shake the feeling that she thought she still did. She didn't come the next morning. I got up early, like usual, still groggy from staying up too late reading the same news stories on my phone. I stood at the kitchen window with my coffee, watching the fence line. 5:30 came and went. Nothing. Just dew on the grass and the slow crawl of morning light through the trees. I waited longer than I'd like to admit. At 6, I stepped out onto the porch, half expecting to see her walk out from behind a tree like she'd been hiding there the whole time. But no. The yard was still. The woods were quiet. And I told myself I should be relieved. But I wasn't. All day, I couldn't stop thinking about her. Not in an obsessive way, at least not at first. Just a quiet itch at the back of my mind, like a riddle I hadn't solved. Who was she? What did she mean by he said, "I could come back when I'm ready"? I checked the county records online during nap time. Our house was built in the early 90s, 2 owners before us. A couple with no kids, and before that a family who'd been here since it was first constructed. Their name was Riddick. I didn't find any mention of a woman, no news articles, no obituaries, just sales records and mortgage info. That night, after we put the kids to bed, I brought it up to Jen again, told her what the woman had said. "She told you she used to live here?" she asked. "Yeah, and that someone told her she could come back, when she's ready." Jen frowned. "That sounds like, I don't know, like something out of a movie." I nodded. She wasn't threatening. She was just there, like she belonged. We sat with that for a minute. "You think she's confused?" Jen asked. Maybe, or she thinks we're the ones in the wrong. Should we call the cops? She hasn't trespassed. We left it there, but I could tell Jen was worried now. Not just about the woman about me, the way I was talking, the way I couldn't let it go. The next morning, I woke up even earlier. 5:15. I didn't even make coffee. I just stood in the dark kitchen watching the yard. My eyes had adjusted to the gray light enough that I could see the tree line clearly. At 5:30, like clockwork, she was there. Same posture, same stillness, different clothes. This time it was a navy blue sweater with pearl buttons and a floral skirt. Her hands were folded in front of her, not at her sides like before. Her hair was pulled back. She looked neater somehow, more formal. I didn't go outside. I just stood behind the glass, hidden in the shadows, watching her. She didn't move, didn't blink. I checked the time again, 5:35, 5:40. She still hadn't moved. But I started to notice something. Her gaze wasn't just directed at the house anymore. It was angled upward, toward the second floor, toward the kid's window. That did something to me, something sharp. I pulled the curtains shut. I went upstairs and checked on them, both asleep, both safe. The room was quiet, nothing unusual. But when I came back down and looked outside again, she was gone. That's when I called the non-emergency police line. I told them there was a woman standing at our back fence every morning at the same time, that she wasn't threatening us, but she was watching, that she said something strange about having lived here. The officer on the phone sounded tired, polite, but detached. He said unless she stepped onto our property or made some kind of verbal threat, there wasn't much they could do. If you can get a photo or video of her, that might help, he added. But standing on the other side of a fence doesn't really qualify as harassment. That was that. I tried to explain it to Jen that night. She was looking at the kid's window. Jen's face tightened. Are you sure? She wasn't looking at me. I know what I saw. She didn't argue, but she didn't say much after that either. Just nodded and started picking up toys from the living room floor like it was any other night. But the next morning, she woke up with me. She stood beside me at the window, both of us wrapped in our robes, silent. At 5:30, the woman was there again. Different outfit, white blouse, pale gray skirt, same flats. This time, she was holding something. A piece of paper. She didn't wave it or lift it high, just held it loosely at her side like a school teacher carrying a lesson plan. I reached for my phone and zoomed in through the window. The picture came out blurry, useless. The low light didn't help. Jen said, "What is that?" And I said, "I don't know." And before we could say anything else, the woman slowly lifted her free hand and pointed at the house. Not the upstairs window. The kitchen. Right at us. Then she turned and walked back into the trees. Jen stepped away from the window. "I want you to talk to someone," she said. "I am talking to someone. You." "No," she said. "A professional." That stung. I didn't respond. She put her hand on my arm. "I believe you. I'm not saying this isn't real, but you're getting obsessed. You're not sleeping. You're jumping at shadows. I'm trying to keep us safe." "I know," she said, "but it's starting to feel like she's not the problem anymore." That hurt more than I wanted to admit. I told her I'd drop it, but I didn't. The next morning I was out there before 5. I brought a folding chair and sat at the edge of the lawn with a flashlight and a thermos full of coffee, like I was on some kind of stakeout. I didn't care how it looked. I wanted to be close enough to see her face clearly, to ask her why. At 5:29 I felt it. That subtle shift in the air, like a curtain lifting. And there she was, right on time. Only this time she wasn't standing. She was kneeling, hands clasped, head bowed, like she was praying. She was kneeling. I didn't move. She stayed like that for 6, maybe 7 minutes, perfectly still, head bowed, hands pressed together, knees sunk into the soft ground just beyond the fence. She didn't flinch, didn't look up, didn't react when I turned on the flashlight and aimed it directly at her face. It was like I wasn't even there. And that, somehow, was worse than if she'd acknowledged me. She rose slowly at 5:43 and walked back into the woods, disappearing behind the same clump of trees as before. By the time I stood up, my coffee was cold. I didn't tell Jen that day. I was already towing the line between concerned and concerning. I knew it. She knew it. Every time I brought it up, I could see that flicker behind her eyes, that little "I'm worried about you" look. So I didn't say anything. I just went about the day like normal, changed a diaper, made toast, folded laundry, rewatched the same episode of Bluey for the 4th time. But my mind stayed fixed on her. Why had she knelt? Why now? Was it ritual? Was it a signal? The next morning, I was back out there before 5 again. Folding chair, thermos, flashlight. This time I brought my phone on a tripod, facing the woods, recording. At 5:29, nothing happened. At 5:30, still nothing. 5:31, 5:32. She stepped out from the trees like she'd never left, walking slowly like she'd been underwater. Different outfit again, light blue dress with tiny white buttons. Her hair was up in a low bun. She didn't kneel this time, just stood with her hands at her sides. But she was closer. A step or two, maybe. Not much. But I knew. I felt it. I turned the flashlight on and aimed it toward her again, and this time I saw her face clearly. It wasn't blank. Not expressionless. She looked sad. Not weeping, not dramatic. Just this quiet, heavy sadness that settled into her features like it had always been there. And then she smiled. Barely. Just the corners of her mouth tugging up like a memory she didn't trust. Then she lifted her hand. Not waving. Pointing. Upstairs again. At the kid's window. I stood, "What do you want?" I asked. She tilted her head. I stepped closer. "Why are you here?" She didn't answer. "Who told you you could come back?" This time she did respond. Her voice was barely audible, calm, almost like a lullaby. "You'll remember soon." I froze. What does that mean? But she was already turning, walking away, slow and unbothered, her pale dress catching the morning light in a way that made it glow. Back into the trees. Gone. When I checked my phone, the recording had stopped halfway through. Storage full. Even though I'd cleared it the night before. I deleted everything, cleared the cache, emptied the trash, reset the camera app. The space wouldn't free up. I ran a factory reset. Still said, storage full. The video was gone, but the space it occupied stayed. That day, I couldn't stop checking the windows. Every reflective surface made me jump. A flash of movement across the lawn, a bird in the brush, a neighbor walking their dog. It all felt too loud, too fast. Like the world was spinning just a little harder around me than it was for everyone else. That night, Jen found me sitting at the kitchen table with the lights off, just staring into the backyard. "You're doing it again," she said gently. I saw her face today. Jen sighed and pulled out a chair. "Do you think maybe she's part of your past? Something you've forgotten?" I looked at her. "Why would you say that?" She hesitated. "You keep saying things like it's personal, like she's here for you." "She is." She pointed at the kid's window. "She told me I'd remember." Jen was quiet for a moment. "Do you remember what happened the year before we moved here?" I blinked. "What?" "Do you remember what happened in May the year before we moved?" I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. I couldn't remember. Not clearly. Just flashes, boxes, a hospital, a quiet room with a window that didn't open. But those were dreams. They felt like dreams. Jen touched my hand. "You got help. You're okay now. But maybe something's getting stirred up again." "She's real." "I believe that you believe that." "No, Jen, she's real." "Okay," she said, not agreeing, not disagreeing, just trying to keep the peace. She went to bed not long after. I stayed downstairs. I pulled out every photo album we had, every storage bin, every moving box from the garage. I dug through them until my hands were covered in dust and old paper cuts. Looking for what? I didn't know. Something, anything, a clue, a name. And then I found it. In a manila envelope at the bottom of a box labeled Old Mail. An envelope addressed to me from a rehab center 3 counties over. I didn't remember going there. But it had my name, my signature, a discharge date, exactly 1 year before we moved into this house. Inside was a thank you note. Not from the center, from someone named L. Written in shaky blue pen. "I hope this place gives you peace. You deserve it more than I do. I'll wait as long as it takes." No last name. No return address. Just Elle. I stared at it until the sun started to rise. I looked out the window. She was already there. She was there when the sun came up. Same place, same stillness. But everything felt different now. I stood at the window, envelope in one hand, coffee forgotten on the counter behind me. I didn't wake Jen. I didn't move. I just stared out at her and tried to line her up with the words on the paper in my hand. I'll wait as long as it takes. That was what the note said. And now here she was. Had she waited? I tried to really remember anything about someone named Elle, but nothing came. No face, no moment, just that constant sense of almost, like a song you can hum but not name. The woman stood like she always did, hands folded, posture straight, eyes fixed on the house. She wore a pale yellow sweater today, tucked into a brown skirt with pleats. Her shoes were the same, always the same, and her hair was down again. It looked familiar. I stepped away from the window and pulled the curtain closed. I didn't know what scared me more, that she was watching us, or that some part of me might have invited her. The kids were up by then. I made breakfast like normal, or tried to. Toast burned. I poured juice into a coffee mug by mistake. Jen noticed, but didn't say anything. She watched me from across the kitchen, waiting to see if I'd bring it up. I didn't. After breakfast, I went out to the garage and found an old trail camera we'd bought back when we thought we were going to become one of those hiking families. I mounted it in the tree closest to the back fence and angled it down. Motion activated, night vision, should have been enough to catch something. Just in case. Just so I'd have proof. That night, I lay awake for hours. My mind kept circling the same drain. Who was she? What did I forget? Had we met before? Had I promised her something? Had I hurt her? Or worse, had I loved her? The next morning, I didn't go outside. I stayed inside, lights off, curtains cracked just enough to see. She came at 5:30. Same spot. New clothes. White blouse, dark green skirt. But something was different. She wasn't looking at the house. She was looking at me. Not at the window, not at the upstairs room. At me. She met my eyes through the sliver in the curtain and just stood there, blinking slow, like she'd been waiting for me to really see her. I wanted to go out there, but I didn't. I don't know if it was fear or guilt, or maybe both. My hand was on the doorknob, but I stayed still. At 5:46, she turned and left. That afternoon, I checked the trail cam. The screen said, motion detected, 5:31 a.m. I opened the clip. There was nothing. No figure, no movement, just a 30-second shot of an empty yard, the fence, the woods behind it, quiet, still. No woman. No proof. I stared at it, trying to make sense of the footage. Did I aim the camera wrong? Did something glitch? But I knew what I saw. She'd been there. I put the trail cam back in the garage. That night, I sat on the porch alone with a blanket over my lap and a flashlight in one hand. I watched the tree line like it owed me answers. I didn't sleep. I didn't blink for long. At 5:28, I heard it. A soft shuffle in the leaves. And then she was there. Not walking out of the woods this time. Just appearing. Like she'd always been standing there and the world had finally caught up. I stood slowly. Walked to the fence. She didn't move. Up close, she looked tired, not disheveled, just worn. Her eyes weren't threatening, they weren't demanding, they were asking. I cleared my throat. "What's your name?" She tilted her head. "You used to know it." "I don't." A soft smile. "Not yet." "You keep coming here, why?" She looked up at the house. "Because he said I could." "Who's he?" "You." I swallowed. "I never said that." "You did, a long time ago." I took a step back. My voice was shaking now. "You can't be here." "I know." She looked down at her hands. "But I don't have anywhere else to be." We stood like that for a while. She never crossed the fence. And eventually, like always, she turned and walked into the woods. Jen was waiting in the doorway when I came back in. She didn't say anything. She just pulled me into a hug and held on longer than usual. The next day, I made an appointment. A therapist. Someone new. Someone who wouldn't start the conversation with "How long has it been since your last visit?" I didn't tell them about the woman right away. I started slow. Just talked about the unease, the guilt I couldn't place, the memory gaps, the feeling that something was waiting for me to catch up to it. We talked about my past treatment, about the breakdown, the hospitalization, the weeks I didn't remember. They told me it was okay. That forgetting is sometimes what the brain needs to survive. I nodded, but I wasn't sure I agreed. Because whatever I'd forgotten, it hadn't forgotten me. That night, I went back through the mail again. Every envelope, every piece of paper, every scribbled note in every old notebook we still had stuffed into drawers. And I found another one. Different handwriting this time. Smaller, tighter. Just 3 lines, written in pencil on the inside of a greeting card that said, "Thinking of you" on the front. He told me to wait here. He said this would be home. I don't know how long that means. It wasn't addressed to anyone, but I knew who it was from, and I knew who it was for. The next morning, I didn't wait for her. I woke up late, slept through my alarm. Jen let me sleep in, which she never does, especially on weekdays. When I finally rolled out of bed, the kids were already halfway through their cereal, and the sun was pouring in through the back windows like nothing had ever been wrong. I went to the kitchen window without even thinking, the way you reach for your phone first thing, and stopped when I realized I'd missed it. She was gone. If she'd come, I hadn't seen her. There was no note, no trace, no impression in the grass near the fence. Just an empty yard, and the distant sound of a lawnmower from 2 houses down. But that didn't bring relief. It brought something else. A hollow, buzzing weight in my chest. Like I'd forgotten to show up for something I didn't know I agreed to. Jen asked me how I was feeling that afternoon. We were standing in the garage, the door open, kids riding scooters in lazy loops down the driveway. I shrugged. "Better," I said, "just tired." She handed me a folded sheet of paper. "I found this in the laundry room. It was tucked behind the dryer." I opened it carefully. Notebook paper, lined, torn at the edge, same tight handwriting as the card. This one was longer. He said not to knock, said the house was fragile now, said they wouldn't understand yet. I promised to wait where it's safe, where I used to sit before everything broke. I remember the fence. I remember the light in the kitchen. I remember his hands shaking. I read it twice, then folded it again and tucked it into my back pocket. Jen didn't ask what it said. She just looked at me, like she already knew. And maybe she did. That night, I sat outside again, no chair, just the grass beneath me, damp and cool, like the earth wanted to remind me I was still part of it. She didn't come at 5:30 or 5:40, but at 5:52 I felt her. Before I saw her, that same shift in the air, that hush, that invisible thread pulling the space between us tight. When I looked up, she was already there. Closer now. Maybe 3 feet from the fence. Not kneeling, not standing straight, just leaning slightly forward, like she was tired, or like she didn't want to scare me. She wore a light gray sweater buttoned up to her throat, long black skirt, hair in a low bun, pale hands folded in front of her like she was waiting her turn to speak. "Your letters," I said. She nodded. "Why did you leave them?" "To remind you." "Of what?" "That I was here, that I still am." I felt something slide into place behind my ribs. A quiet truth. I rubbed my hands together. Did I know you?" She tilted her head. "You do." "I don't remember." "You will." "Were we," I started, then stopped. The word tasted wrong. "I don't know," I said instead. "I don't know what's real anymore." She took a small step forward, just enough that I could see her more clearly. Her face was soft, no makeup, no lines that didn't belong. She looked like someone I should have known. Someone whose photo I might have glanced past in a forgotten album. "You said I could come back when I was ready," she said. "When was that?" "You didn't know at the time." "What did I say exactly?" She closed her eyes. "You said, when I get better, when things are safe again, you can come back," and I waited. I felt the air thicken around me. My legs felt rooted to the earth, like I couldn't have stood even if I wanted to. "You never came inside," I said. "I promised I wouldn't." "You kept that promise." She smiled, and for a moment I felt something warm, familiar. Like I'd seen that smile before, across a table or in a hospital room, or in a photo that got thrown away. I swallowed hard. Are you real? Her smile didn't change. You're asking the wrong question. What's the right one? She paused, then said softly, why did you forget me? I felt dizzy. I don't know. She stepped closer. I think you needed to. I think you had to let me go, but you didn't know how, so you pushed it down until it stopped knocking. I didn't mean to. I know. I sat in silence, the morning cold starting to settle into my skin. Behind us, the trees were starting to shift color, the edges of fall creeping in. She looked at the house. Is it different now? Yes, I said. Better? Sometimes. She nodded. I'm sorry I scared you. You didn't, I said. But we both knew that wasn't true. You're not coming back again, are you? I asked. No. Because I remember now. No, she said, because you're not mine anymore. I didn't know what to say to that. She stepped back, and for the first time, she smiled fully. No sadness, no questions, just a quiet goodbye that didn't need to be spoken. Then she turned and walked into the woods, and this time, I didn't feel afraid, because I knew she wasn't lost. She was done waiting. I sat in the grass until the sun came up. When Jen came outside with a blanket draped over her arm and 2 mugs in her hands, I looked up at her and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Here, present, unburied. I took the coffee. She sat next to me. Neither of us said anything. We didn't need to. Inside my pocket, the letter stayed folded, still warm. And for the first time, it didn't feel like a secret. She didn't come back after that morning. I watched for her, of course. The first few days, I still got up early, still sat in the kitchen with the lights off, watching the tree line like I always did, but the fence stayed empty. The woods were still, and a strange thing started to happen. I missed her. Not in a literal way. I wasn't longing for her to return, or for the things she said, or the eerie quiet that came with her presence. I missed the weight of her, the tension, the way her presence had pointed me toward something I didn't want to face until I had no choice. Now that she was gone, there was nothing between me and the truth. And it was quiet. Too quiet at first. For a few days, I wandered the house like I was waiting for something to snap back into place. Jen kept her distance, gently. She didn't press. She just stayed nearby, bringing me coffee, checking in with her eyes more than her words. I think she knew I was finally facing something I'd kept buried long enough to forget I'd buried it. I kept that letter, the one I found behind the dryer, in my pocket for a while. Then I moved it to a drawer in the hallway, then to a small box in the closet. I wasn't hiding it. I just didn't need it to be close anymore. The memories didn't come all at once. They never do. But little things began to surface. The sound of a voice I couldn't place, a small silver necklace knotted in the bottom of an old toiletries bag, a memory of a hospital room that wasn't mine, but felt familiar. Someone crying softly while I stared out the window. Someone telling me I needed time, that I needed space. The grief came later. Not sharp and loud, like I thought it might. Just slow, like water through a cracked ceiling. A steady drip of realization, of acceptance. She was someone I'd known. Someone I'd loved. I didn't need the details to feel the loss. The absence was enough. Jen was the one who finally said it out loud, a few weeks later, when the kids were with her parents and we were sitting out back in the early evening. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the grass. I was staring at the fence just out of habit, and she said, her name was Lila. I didn't say anything at first. She continued, it was a long time ago, before me. You were both very young. You told me about her once, during your recovery. When we first met, you said she was the reason you got better, but also the reason it got so bad. I looked over at her. She wasn't dangerous, Jen added quickly, not in the way people usually mean. She was unstable, not well, but she loved you, and you loved her. My throat felt tight. What happened to her? Jen hesitated. She left, voluntarily, checked herself into long-term care. You said you told her to come back when she was ready, that you'd wait, but when she got out, you were already with me. I nodded slowly. Something in my chest pulled tight, then let go. You didn't remember any of it, Jen said. Not until now. I think I needed to forget. I think you had to. We sat in silence for a while. I looked at the fence again, not with fear, not with expectation, just with a kind of reverence, like you'd look at the edge of a page before turning it. I didn't want to hurt her, I said. I know. I thought I was doing the right thing. You were. The crickets started chirping as the sky darkened. I kept seeing her, I whispered. I believe you. It felt so real. Jen took my hand. Maybe it was. I've thought about that moment a lot in the time since. Whether Lila was really there, or if she was something my mind conjured to finally make me remember. I've read about that trauma taking shape, manifesting, giving your memory something it can look at until you're ready to let it back in. But the truth is, I don't need a definitive answer. Because whatever she was, hallucination or haunting, memory or ghost, she helped me heal. She stood at that fence every morning because part of me still owed her something. Not an apology, not a second chance, just recognition. The kind that comes from finally saying, I remember. I haven't seen her since that last day. But I still think about her sometimes. When the wind moves through the trees just right, when the kids run through the backyard and their laughter echoes in the woods, when I wake up early and find myself looking out the window before the sun rises. I don't expect her to come back. She doesn't need to. The promise was kept. Not in the way either of us imagined, but still. We both waited. And in the end, we both remembered. There's peace in that. Now, Our home feels whole again, not in some magical way, just settled, balanced, as if a room that had always been locked quietly opened itself and let in some air. I think healing is like that. Not loud, not immediate, just small changes in direction. The fence is still there. I haven't fixed it or painted it or changed it in any way. Sometimes I leave a light on in the kitchen overnight, and when I wake up in the morning and glance outside, I can almost believe I see her there. Not as a threat, not as a question, just as someone who came back one last time, and then moved on, like I did, like I had to. When I first moved into the house, I thought I had gotten a good deal. It was one of those old rentals tucked back off a quiet street. Nothing fancy, just a small 2-story place with a creaky porch and paint that had probably not seen a fresh coat in decades. The rent was cheap enough that I could cover it on my own without killing myself working overtime, and the landlord seemed friendly, if a little brisk. He handed me the keys, rattled off a list of quirks about the plumbing and the wiring, then paused when he mentioned the basement. "That stays locked," he said flatly, handing me a set of keys that were clearly incomplete. "For your own safety. Old stairs, rotten boards, could give way under you. No reason to go down there anyway." At the time, I did not think much of it. A lot of old houses have sketchy basements. I figured it was storage he did not want tenants messing with. Or maybe it was just full of junk. I nodded, agreed, and moved on. The first week was uneventful. I worked, came home, unpacked boxes at a lazy pace, and tried to get used to the sounds of an older house. The walls creaked at night, pipes clanked whenever the heat kicked in, and the wind slipped through the cracks around the windows. It was nothing unusual. But by the second week, I started noticing something that did not fit into the category of just an old house. It was the vents. At first I thought maybe one of them was loose, rattling in the ducts whenever the heat clicked on. But the more I listened, the more certain I became that it was not metal or pipes. It was softer, higher pitched. The closest way I can describe it is the sound of a child laughing, muffled, like it was drifting up through the metal grates. The first time it happened, I was in bed reading. I froze, listening hard, and told myself I had imagined it, a dreamlike half sound that slipped in while I was tired. But then it came again, quick and light, like a giggle someone was trying to stifle. I got out of bed, checked the house, even stepped outside for a minute to see if maybe some neighbor's kid was out late, but the street was empty, the night was quiet. I told myself it was nothing and went back to bed, though sleep did not come easy. The next night, it happened again. This time I heard it while brushing my teeth, the sound rising up from the vent in the bathroom floor. A giggle, short and distinct. I stood there with the toothbrush hanging from my mouth, staring at the grate, the hairs on my arms prickling. I kicked it lightly with my foot, half expecting something to scurry away like a mouse, but there was nothing. It became a pattern after that. Some nights I would hear it faintly, other nights not at all. It was always soft, always quick, never long enough for me to really catch it clearly. But I started to dread it, lying awake in bed waiting, straining my ears for that faint, distant sound. Then came the toys. It was a Saturday afternoon when I first saw one. I was walking past the basement door, which sat tucked in the back hallway near the kitchen, when something small rolled out from under the crack at the bottom. I stopped, confused, and bent down. It was a little red ball, the kind you would expect to see in a preschool toy box. Faded rubber, scuffed like it had been played with for years. I picked it up slowly, turning it over in my hand. I did not own any toys. I lived alone. I had no nieces or nephews, no friends who had visited with kids. There was no reason for that ball to be there. I pushed the ball back toward the door, half expecting it to bounce against the wood and roll back, but it disappeared under the crack, like someone on the other side had reached for it. My mouth went dry. I backed away from the door and did not touch it again. That night, I did not sleep at all. Every creak, every faint sound in the vents set me on edge. Around 2 a.m, I heard the giggle again, this time longer, like whoever it was found something particularly funny. It rose up through the vent near the kitchen, and I sat there on the couch, staring at the basement door, too terrified to move. I thought about calling the landlord, but what would I say? I think there's a child in your locked basement, even though you said it was unsafe. He would laugh me off or accuse me of snooping where I was not supposed to. I tried to convince myself it was just the house settling in some strange way, or maybe kids from down the street sneaking into the yard. But deep down, I knew better. A few days later, it happened again. This time it was not the ball. It was a little plastic car, bright yellow, that slid out from under the door as if nudged by a hand. I stared at it for a long time, my skin crawling, before I picked it up and dropped it into the trash. But the next morning, it was back on the kitchen counter. That was when I knew I had to look. I spent the entire day trying to talk myself out of it, telling myself it was a terrible idea, that the landlord had been clear, that the stairs were dangerous. But curiosity mixed with fear can be stronger than reason. That evening, I found myself kneeling in front of the basement door, running my fingers over the lock. It was not much, just an old rusted padlock holding the latch shut. I pressed my ear to the door, listening. At first there was nothing. Then, faintly, a sound drifted up, not laughter this time, humming. A child humming. My hands shook as I pulled back. I told myself I would buy bolt cutters in the morning. I told myself I needed to see, because whatever was down there, it was not just pipes and old boards. And if I did not find out, I knew it was only going to get worse. The next day, I went to the hardware store. I told myself it was for peace of mind, that I needed to know what was behind that door, or I would never be able to sleep again. My hands shook as I picked up a set of bolt cutters, the kind heavy enough to snap through steel without much effort. The clerk made some offhand joke about me planning a break-in, and I laughed nervously, but the sound that came out of my mouth was strained, not natural. I could feel eyes on me as I carried the tool back to the car, like everyone in the store could tell I was planning something I should not. I did not go straight home. I sat in the parking lot for a long time, sweating in the stale air of the car, telling myself I was being stupid. Maybe it really was just junk in that basement. Maybe the landlord had old boxes, or the place was structurally unsound like he claimed. Maybe I was letting late-night creaks and drafts in my imagination run wild. But then I thought about the little red ball. I thought about the yellow car. I thought about the faint giggle that had risen up through the bathroom vent and how my skin had crawled at the sound. I drove home slowly, heart pounding harder the closer I got to the house. By the time I pulled into the driveway, my palms were slick with sweat, and I had to sit there for several minutes before I could even get out of the car. My dog, who I had left in the backyard because he had started refusing to come inside, barked once as I unlocked the back door. It sounded less like a greeting and more like a warning. I carried the bolt cutters down the narrow hallway toward the basement door. My footsteps echoed too loud in the silence. The air felt heavier near that door, the kind of thick stillness that presses against your chest. I stopped in front of it and just stood there, staring at the padlock, listening. At first, nothing. Then, faint and high, like a radio signal just out of range, came the sound, giggling. I dropped the bolt cutters. The clang against the old floorboards made me flinch. The giggling stopped immediately, cut off so abruptly it made my stomach lurch. My breath came fast, shallow, as I bent to pick up the cutters again. My hand hesitated, hovering above the lock. Do it now or you never will, I thought. The cutters bit through the rusted metal with a loud snap. The sound seemed to echo through the entire house. I froze, listening, but the silence that followed was complete. No giggle, no humming, no scuff of little feet. I pushed the door open an inch. The smell hit me first, damp, moldy air, thick with dust. I gagged, pulling my shirt up over my nose, and forced the door open wider. A set of narrow wooden stairs led down into darkness. I flicked the light switch just inside the door, but nothing happened. Either the bulb was burned out or the basement had no working electricity at all. I shone my phone flashlight down instead. The beam cut across stone walls, low beams, and a dirt floor scattered with debris. And then I saw them. Toys. Not modern ones. Old wooden blocks, a worn stuffed rabbit, a rusted metal car. They were scattered across the floor like someone had been playing and left in a hurry. My pulse hammered in my ears. I told myself they could have been left there decades ago. But then I noticed something that turned my stomach to ice. Drawings. Every wall I could see was covered in them. Crayon drawings, messy and uneven, like a child's hand had scrawled them. Most were stick figures standing on a staircase. Some had a tall shape at the top of the stairs, looming over a smaller figure at the bottom. In every drawing, the small figure looked trapped, while the tall figure never moved. I stumbled backward up the stairs, nearly tripping over my own feet. My hand slipped on the railing as I scrambled out, slamming the basement door behind me so hard it rattled in its frame. My chest heaved, my throat raw, every hair on my body standing on end. That night, I could not sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those drawings, the uneven lines, the stick figure at the top of the stairs, the way it was always just standing there, watching. My dog refused to come into the house at all, whining and scratching at the back door whenever I tried. Eventually, I gave up and slept in the living room with the windows open so I could hear him if he barked. And then morning came, and something worse than the drawings was waiting for me. I shuffled into the kitchen, bleary-eyed, reaching for the coffee pot. That was when I saw it. A piece of paper on the kitchen table, white printer paper, folded once down the middle. My stomach sank as I unfolded it with shaking hands. It was a crayon drawing. Me, standing at the top of the basement stairs. The crayon lines were rough but clear. My hair, my posture, even the small details, like the creak in the floorboard where I always leaned. I dropped the paper like it had burned me and staggered back, knocking the chair over in my panic. My eyes darted to the basement door. It was still closed, the broken lock hanging loose, but I could not shake the feeling that something had come up during the night. Something had been here. I grabbed the paper off the table and crumpled it, throwing it into the trash. My hands would not stop shaking. I poured myself coffee just to have something to do, but it sloshed over the rim of the mug, dark liquid dripping onto the counter. The rest of the day I spent pacing the house, checking the doors and windows, trying to convince myself it was a prank, that maybe someone had broken in and left the drawing, but nothing else was touched. No signs of forced entry, nothing stolen, just the drawing, sitting there on the table like a gift. That night, I did not even try to sleep inside. I dragged a blanket out to the back porch and lay there with my dog curled against me, staring at the basement windows that jutted up just above the ground. I could not see anything in the dark glass, but I felt it, watching, waiting, and as the night dragged on, I thought I heard it again, faint, soft, a giggle rising up through the vents. This time, though, it did not stop. I woke up on the porch with a stiff neck and the faint feeling that someone had been watching me the entire night. My dog was curled against me, head tucked under my arm, but even he did not look like he had really slept. His eyes were half open, his ears twitching at every sound. The sun was just starting to rise, bleeding pale light across the yard. For a few brief seconds I thought maybe I had survived the worst of it, that maybe whatever lived in the basement stayed down there. Then I went inside. The kitchen table was covered in drawings. Not one or two this time. At least a dozen sheets of paper were spread across the wood. overlapping like a deck of cards scattered by a careless hand. Crayon drawings. Childlike, uneven lines, and every single one of them was of me. In one, I was standing at the stove. In another, I was brushing my teeth. In another, I was lying on the couch, the blanket pulled up to my chin. Each scene was real, something I had actually done in the past day. The colors were wrong, the proportions were strange, but the actions were unmistakable. My stomach dropped. I grabbed a few of the drawings and flipped them over, looking for any kind of explanation. But the backs were blank. My hands were shaking so badly that I dropped one. It fluttered to the floor face up. That one was the worst of all. It showed me standing at the back door. Behind me, a smaller figure crouched low, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. No features, just a round shape with two empty circles for eyes. I snatched the drawing off the floor and shoved it with the others into the trash. My heart pounded so hard I thought I might throw up. My dog stood in the doorway, hackles raised, a low growl in his throat. He was staring at the basement door, his body trembling. I did not go near that door for the rest of the day. I locked myself in the living room with my phone, debating who I could call. The landlord, the police, a priest. Every option felt ridiculous. What would I even say? Hi, I think a ghost child is sneaking upstairs from the locked basement you swore was unsafe. They would laugh me off, or worse, think I had lost my mind. By evening, I was desperate enough to text my friend Mark. I typed something vague, like, weird stuff happening at my new place. Can you come stay the night? He agreed without asking questions. I nearly cried from relief. Mark showed up around 9 with a six-pack and a confused grin. I did not tell him everything. I just said the house was old and creepy and I had been hearing things at night. He teased me a little, called me paranoid, but when he saw the tension in my face, he backed off. We sat up in the living room with the TV on, trying to pretend everything was normal. It was almost midnight when it started again. The vents rattled, faint at first, then more distinct. A giggle, a soft, high-pitched giggle drifting up through the floor. I froze, beer halfway to my mouth. Mark frowned and muted the TV. We both listened. The sound came again, louder this time, unmistakable. "Is there a kid outside?" he asked, but his voice lacked conviction. I shook my head. "It comes from the basement." Mark laughed nervously, like he thought I was joking, but the look on my face must have convinced him otherwise. He stood, walked to the basement door, and pressed his ear against it. I wanted to stop him, but the words stuck in my throat. After a few seconds, he pulled back. His face was pale. "There's something down there," he whispered. Before I could respond, something rolled out from under the door. A small wooden block, red paint chipped and worn. Mark jumped back like he had been burned. My dog went berserk, barking and lunging at the door, his teeth snapping at the air. We stood frozen, watching, as another block slid out. Then another, a slow, deliberate push, one after the other, until half a dozen lay scattered across the floor. Mark grabbed my arm. "We need to leave." I nodded, but my legs would not move. My eyes were locked on the basement door. The blocks lay still now, the silence heavier than ever. I could feel something on the other side, waiting. We spent the night in Mark's car. Neither of us spoke much. My dog curled in the back seat, trembling. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those drawings on the table. Me, going about my day, unaware of the eyes watching me. When morning came, we went back inside together. The drawings were gone from the trash. The table was clean. The blocks had vanished too. The basement door stood closed, the broken padlock still dangling from the latch. Mark looked at me like he wanted to ask questions, but he did not. He just said, "You should get out of here," and left. I wanted to take his advice. I wanted to pack my things and run, but something in me needed answers. I could not just leave, not when I knew something was down there. Something that giggled and drew and rolled toys out like it wanted to play. something that knew me well enough to leave drawings of me asleep. That night, I set up my phone to record video, propping it on the counter facing the basement door. I sat in the living room with my dog, heart pounding, waiting. Around 2 in the morning, the giggling started again. My dog growled, low and steady, fur bristling. I forced myself to stay put, gripping his collar, whispering to him even though my own voice shook. The giggling grew louder. Something scraped against the inside of the basement door, then silence. When I checked the phone in the morning, the battery was dead. The last frame before it cut off showed the basement door cracked open an inch. I swear I had locked it. I barely touched the doorknob that morning, just brushed it with my fingertips to convince myself it was really closed, that the frame was still solid. But I could not stop staring at the gap along the floor, the thin line of darkness that looked wider than it had the day before. My dog stood stiff beside me, ears flat, a low growl thrumming in his chest like a motor that never turned off. I made coffee, but my hands shook so badly I spilled half the grounds onto the counter. The whole time, I kept glancing back toward the hallway. The door looked ordinary in the light of day, but I knew better. I had seen the toys roll out. I had heard the giggles seep through the vents. And now the memory of that recording burned in my head, the frame showing the door cracked open, even though I had sworn it was locked. I told myself I was done avoiding it. Whatever lived down there, whatever drew those pictures of me and pushed toys into my house, I had to face it. I thought about calling Mark again, begging him to come back, but I knew he would refuse. He had seen enough the other night to decide he wanted no part of this. That left me alone, me and the dog, staring at a door I could not ignore. It took me until late afternoon to work up the courage. The sun was low, throwing long shadows across the yard, when I grabbed a flashlight, clipped my dog's leash to his collar, and stood in front of the basement door. The broken padlock still dangled uselessly. My hand trembled as I turned the knob. The hinges creaked, the sound shrill in the silence. The smell hit me again, damp and heavy, like dirt and mold and something sweeter underneath, almost like rotting fruit. My dog whined, pulled back hard on the leash, but I tugged him forward. I could not do this alone. The stairs groaned under my weight as I descended. My flashlight beam jumped across the stone walls, illuminating scattered toys, dust motes dancing in the air, cobwebs clinging to beams. My heart thudded in my ears. I felt the dog press against my leg, his nails clicking nervously on the wood. At the bottom of the stairs, I turned slowly, sweeping the light across the walls. That was when I saw the drawings again, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Every surface was covered, the lines overlapping, some fresher than others, the colors more vibrant where the wax had not yet faded. Figures at the top of the stairs, always the same, a tall shape looming, sometimes a small figure at the bottom, sometimes 2, sometimes 3, but always that tall shape watching from above. I stepped closer, shining the light over the rough scrawls. My stomach lurched as I realized some of the fresher drawings were not stick figures anymore. They were more detailed, the outline of my hair, the slope of my shoulders, even the shape of my dog, drawn with clumsy but recognizable strokes of brown crayon. My hand shook so hard I almost dropped the flashlight. I pressed my palm against the wall for balance and felt wax crumble under my fingers. When I pulled away, a smear of red and black streaked my skin. Behind me, the dog whined sharply, pulling at the leash. He was staring at the far corner of the basement, where the darkness seemed heavier, thicker, as if the light refused to reach it. My heart hammered. I raised the flashlight slowly, the beam cutting across the dirt floor. And then I saw it. Not a person, not a body, just more drawings, scrawled in frantic layers. But these were not on the wall. They were on the floor. Sheets of paper spread in a rough circle, each one covered in the same crude lines. Every single one showed me, standing in the kitchen, sitting on the couch, sleeping in bed. My throat went dry as I recognized the details. These were the same poses from the drawings that had appeared on my table, but these were not copies. These were originals, the crayon wax still fresh, smudged by small hands. My knees went weak. I stumbled back, nearly tripping on a wooden block. The dog barked once, a sharp, desperate sound, then lunged for the stairs, dragging me with him. I let him pull me, stumbling up the steps, slamming the door behind us when we reached the hallway. My chest heaved, my whole body shaking so hard I could not catch my breath. I pressed my back against the door, gripping the leash like a lifeline. My dog whined, pawing at me, eyes wide and glassy. I whispered to him, trying to calm him, though my own voice cracked and shook. For hours after, I sat on the kitchen floor, staring at the door, waiting for something to push back from the other side. Nothing did. The silence stretched on, heavier than before, pressing against me until I felt like I might choke. When exhaustion finally won, I dragged myself to the couch and collapsed. My dreams were restless, filled with muffled laughter and crayon lines scratching across paper. When I woke in the morning, the kitchen table was no longer empty. One sheet of paper lay in the center, white, crisp, edges clean, a single drawing in red crayon. It was me, standing at the top of the basement stairs, and at the bottom, for the first time, there was a face on the smaller figure, a round head, wide eyes, and a grin that stretched too far across the page. I dropped the drawing and stumbled back, bile rising in my throat. My dog barked furiously, claws scraping at the floor. The paper fluttered off the table and landed face up at my feet, that wide grin staring up at me. I wanted to run, to pack my bags and never look back, but I knew it was too late. Whatever lived in that basement knew me now. It had watched me, drawn me, followed me into every corner of the house, and it wanted me to know it was not staying in the basement anymore. The drawing with the grin stayed on the floor where I dropped it. I could not bring myself to touch it again. Every time I walked into the kitchen, I gave it a wide berth, like it might bite me if I got too close. My dog avoided it too, growling low whenever he passed by. For hours I paced the house, too wired to sit still, too terrified to leave. I could not stop thinking about those walls downstairs, the way every surface had been covered with crayon lines, as if a child had spent years scribbling their days away in the dark. And now, it was not just confined drawings anymore. It was me. It was my life, mapped out in wax and paper. By afternoon, I tried to convince myself it was some kind of prank. I pulled out the trash can and rifled through the bag where I had stuffed the earlier drawings. They were gone, every last one. The crumpled papers, the smeared crayons, vanished. The only thing left was that single sheet on the kitchen floor, the grin glaring up at me. My stomach turned. That night I did not even attempt to sleep in my bedroom. I dragged the couch cushions into the living room and pushed them up against the front door. My dog curled beside me, tense and silent, his ears twitching at every sound. The house seemed to breathe around us, each creak and groan magnified in the dark. I kept the flashlight in my lap, turning it on every few minutes to sweep across the walls, terrified I would see another drawing waiting for me. Around 2 a.m, I heard it, the faint scrape of paper against wood. I sat bolt upright, the flashlight beam shaking wildly in my hands. The sound came again, from the kitchen. Like someone sliding a sheet of paper across the table, my dog growled, a deep rumble that vibrated against my side. I forced myself to stand, legs trembling, and crept toward the kitchen. The table was covered again. Not 1 or 2 drawings this time, but dozens. They were spread across the surface in neat rows, each one showing the same thing, me, asleep on the couch, the flashlight in my lap, the dog at my feet. It was not some imagined version. It was exactly how I had looked seconds earlier. I staggered back, the flashlight beam bouncing wildly. My throat went dry, My skin prickled. The dog barked, sharp and desperate, lunging toward the basement door. His claws scraped at the wood as he snarled, teeth bared. I spun the flashlight that way just in time to see the doorknob turn, slowly, deliberately. I froze. My lungs seized. The knob clicked back into place without opening. Silence. Then, a soft sound seeped through the door. A giggle. High, childlike, but stretched too thin, too long, like someone trying to imitate what laughter should sound like. I ran. I grabbed the dog's leash, yanked him away from the door, and bolted outside barefoot, my heart hammering so hard I thought I might pass out. The cold air slapped me in the face, but I barely noticed. I stumbled to the end of the driveway and stood there shaking, the leash wrapped tight around my fist as my dog pulled anxiously at the end. I could not bring myself to go back inside until the sun came up. When I did, the drawings were gone again. The table wiped clean. Only one remained. It sat dead center on the wood, waiting for me. This time, the drawing showed me standing outside in the driveway, barefoot, clutching the leash. The detail was uncanny, right down to the wrinkles in my shirt. My stomach dropped as I realized what that meant. Whatever was in that basement had followed me outside. It had been close enough to see me clearly. That day I started searching for answers. I called the landlord first. He was curt, almost angry, when I mentioned the basement. "I told you not to go down there." He snapped, his voice sharp through the phone. "That part of the house is not for tenants. Stay out of it. That is all you need to know." When I pressed him, when I demanded to know if any children had ever lived there, he hung up on me. I spent the next few hours online, searching records, old news clippings, anything I could find about the property. There was almost nothing. No history, no mention of children, just vague notes about the house changing owners a few times over the decades. It was like the place had been scrubbed clean. By evening I felt raw, my nerves shredded. I could not concentrate. Every shadow looked too deep, every corner too dark. My dog refused to leave my side, glued to me like he knew I was seconds away from falling apart. That night I taped the basement door shut with duct tape, layer after layer crisscrossed over the frame. It was pathetic. I knew it would not hold anything, but it gave me the illusion of safety. I collapsed on the couch again, exhaustion pulling at me. I woke hours later to the sound of tearing. My stomach dropped. The dog whimpered low, ears flat, as we both stared toward the hallway. The tape was peeling away from the door, curling and ripping like invisible fingers were prying it loose. One strip fell to the floor, then another. The silence in the house was suffocating, broken only by the slow rip of tape being pulled free. I could not move. I sat frozen on the couch, the flashlight clutched in a white-knuckled grip, my heart pounding so loud I was sure it could hear me. Finally, the sound stopped. I waited, chest tight, breath shallow. The dog barked once, sharp, then went silent, trembling against me. In the morning, I forced myself to check. The tape was gone, every strip peeled neatly away. At first I thought the door was closed, untouched. Then I saw the tiniest sliver of space between the door and the frame. The door was open, just a crack. On the floor beneath it, pushed halfway into the hallway, lay another drawing. I bent slowly to pick it up, my hands trembling so hard I almost dropped it. It was me again, standing at the top of the basement stairs, but this time the smaller figure was not at the bottom. It was halfway up, 1 foot on the next step, the grin wider than ever. I staggered back, bile rising in my throat. The air felt heavy, pressing against me like a weight. I realized in that moment that it was not just trying to watch me anymore. It was coming closer. And no matter how much I wanted to deny it, I knew there was nothing keeping it down there now. I hardly remember the hours after finding that last drawing. My brain felt scrambled, my chest tight, my throat raw like I had been screaming even though I had not made a sound. I sat on the floor for what must have been half the day, staring at the thin crack in the basement door, waiting for it to push open. The drawing lay on the ground beside me, the grin wide and jagged, the small figure halfway up the stairs. I could not bring myself to touch it again. At some point I forced myself to pack a bag, just a few clothes, my wallet, and my dog's leash. My hands shook so badly that I dropped half the things I tried to shove into the bag. The dog barked once, sharp and panicked, as if he knew I was planning to run. That was the hardest part. I knew he sensed every shift in the air, every sound I pretended not to hear. He had been my only anchor through this whole nightmare. I could not stay in that house another night. The moment I stepped outside with the bag, though, I froze. Sitting on the porch, neat as could be, was another drawing. No envelope, no note, just paper weighed down by a small wooden block. The block was red, the paint chipped and faded, and I swear I had seen it roll from under the basement door that first night. The drawing showed me standing outside with the bag in my hand, my dog at my side. It was not just a scene, it was that exact moment. I dropped the bag and bolted for the car, dragging the dog behind me. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely see straight. The car stank of mildew when I slid inside, like something had been sitting there waiting. I cranked the engine and tore out of the driveway, tires skidding on gravel. My hands were slick on the wheel, my throat tight. I did not look in the rearview mirror. I could not. I was too afraid of what I might see. I drove for hours, no real destination in mind. The dog whined in the back seat, restless but calmer than he had been in days. I pulled into a cheap roadside motel and paid in cash. The room smelled of smoke and bleach, but I locked the door, dragged a chair under the knob, and collapsed onto the bed with the dog curled against my legs. For the first time in weeks, I slept. The morning light felt almost holy when it streamed through the threadbare curtains. I showered, ate a stale muffin from the vending machine, and for a few hours I almost convinced myself I had outrun it, that I had left whatever haunted that house behind me. Then I noticed the crayon marks on the motel nightstand. They were faint, almost like someone had scrawled in a hurry, but the waxy texture was unmistakable. Red lines, a circle for a head, two wide eyes, a grin stretched too far. My chest caved in, my stomach turned to ice. I pulled the dog close, trembling, trying to breathe. My mind raced with questions I could not answer. How had it followed me? Had it ever been trapped in that basement at all? Or had the basement just been where I first noticed it? I left the motel the same day, kept driving, kept moving. I called the landlord once more, desperate for some kind of truth. He answered, but when I demanded to know who had lived there, if any children had died in that house, his voice dropped low. There were never any children, he said flatly, and then he hung up. That was a week ago. I have been staying with friends since then, bouncing from place to place, never in one spot long enough to notice if drawings start appearing. I do not sleep much. When I do, I wake to the faint sound of giggling, too close to dismiss, too real to ignore. The dog barks at corners sometimes. He stares at vents like something is hiding inside. I try to tell myself it is just him picking up on my nerves, but I know better. I know what I saw on those walls. I know what I heard through those vents. I know what I held in my shaking hands, paper that smelled of wax and dust, and something else I cannot describe. People keep telling me to move on, to forget, to let it go. But how do you forget the sound of a child's giggle rising up from a basement that was supposed to be locked for safety? How do you forget finding your life mapped out in crayon drawings made by hands you never saw? I do not know if it will find me again. Maybe it already has. Maybe the reason I never sleep through the night is because something is standing at the foot of the bed, watching. Maybe every time I leave a room, it is drawing me, scribbling me onto paper so it can know me better, follow me closer. I tell myself that leaving the house was enough, that it ended when I drove away. But deep down I know that is not true. I do not think it lives in the basement at all. I think it lives with me now, and no matter where I go, it will always know exactly where I am. I still remember the day we found her like it was yesterday, even though years have passed since that strange afternoon on the Oregon Coast Trail. My friends and I had planned a weekend hike to escape the noise of city life and to soak in the salty air. The trailhead was quiet except for the usual chatter of birds and the crashing waves somewhere out of sight. We were just getting ready to start our trek when we saw her. She was sitting barefoot right beside the big wooden welcome sign. Her hair was tangled, dirty, and her clothes looked worn and weathered from the elements. No shoes, no backpack, no phone, and nothing that looked like identification. She just sat there, staring out into the distance with those wide eyes that seemed both lost and oddly knowing. My first thought was that she was a runaway, or maybe a kid who had gotten lost hiking. I called out to her gently, asking if she needed help. She didn't respond at first, just kept looking ahead like she was watching something only she could see. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but carried a strange weight, like she was used to being ignored. She said she had walked from the ocean, and when we asked if she needed water or food, she only asked if we had seen the white trees. The question caught us off guard. None of us knew what she meant, and before we could ask more, she blinked, and she was gone. We all froze. It was the kind of moment you don't expect to happen in real life. We looked around quickly. The beach stretched out in one direction, the dense forest in the other. No footprints in the dirt or sand, no sign she had walked away, just an empty space where she had been moments before. Feeling a mix of confusion and concern, we reported the encounter to a nearby ranger station. The ranger who took our story looked serious, but not surprised. After we finished, she leaned in and said something I still remember clearly. "That girl's been showing up here since 1998. I wanted to laugh it off, to say it was some local legend or joke, but the ranger's eyes told a different story. There was a deep sadness there, as if the trail itself held a secret too heavy to share fully. The Oregon Coast Trail is a wild and beautiful place, known for its rugged cliffs, ancient forests, and misty beaches. Many hikers have tales of strange sightings and unexplained sounds, but nothing ever prepared me for the girl at the trailhead. I tried to forget the encounter, thinking maybe it was a trick of the light or a hallucination brought on by fatigue and salty air, but something about her stayed with me. The way she looked, the words she said, and especially the way she vanished without a trace. I began to ask around, talking to locals and other hikers. Some mentioned a feral child rumored to wander the forests, a girl who appeared suddenly and disappeared just as fast. Others spoke of a ghost tied to a devastating storm that had swept through the coast years before, but no one had answers. The white trees, whatever they were, seemed to be a key. I learned that parts of the forest were home to ancient trees with pale, almost glowing bark. Some said the trees were sacred, tied to old legends of spirits and guardians of the land. I couldn't shake the feeling that the girl and the white trees were connected in a way I didn't understand yet. That night, I lay in my tent, listening to the ocean waves and wondering about the girl. Who was she? Where had she come from? And why did she keep appearing after all these years? The next morning, I went back to the trailhead, hoping to see her again or find some clue. The welcome sign stood tall, but there was no sign of her, just the whispering wind and the salty air. I touched the sign, feeling the rough wood beneath my fingers, and I wondered if the forest held answers, waiting for someone brave enough to find them. After that first strange encounter, I couldn't stop thinking about the girl and the white trees she mentioned. The phrase stuck in my mind, and I knew I had to find out more about it. So, when we weren't hiking, I started asking around town. The locals were a mix of friendly and wary, and while many had their own stories about the Oregon Coast Trail, most didn't want to talk about the girl. Some said she was a myth, others whispered about sightings, and a few just shook their heads as if the memory was painful. One afternoon, I met an older man at the local diner who had lived in the area for decades. He was quiet and observant, his eyes reflecting the misty coast itself. When I asked about the white trees, his face changed. He leaned in and said they were a rare kind of alder tree that grew only in a few spots along the coast. Their bark was pale, almost glowing under the moonlight, and they were considered sacred by some of the local tribes. He told me that the trees were tied to old stories about spirits who protected the land and watched over travelers. People said the trees could guide the lost home or warn those in danger. But he also warned that some spirits were restless, searching for something they had lost. The man's words sent a shiver down my spine. Could the girl be one of those spirits? Or was she a living person somehow connected to the forest in a way I didn't understand? Determined to learn more, I borrowed a map from the ranger station and planned a hike to the areas where these white trees were said to grow. My friends were skeptical but curious enough to come along. We packed light and headed into the thick forest, the air cool and heavy with the scent of pine and wet earth. As we walked, the forest changed. The trees grew taller and older, their trunks thick and covered in moss. The sunlight filtered through the canopy, casting dappled shadows on the ground. Then, suddenly, we came upon a cluster of pale trees. Their bark was smooth and white, almost luminous against the darker woods around them. I felt an eerie calm wash over me, like we had stepped into another world. The air was still, and the only sound was the crunch of leaves beneath our boots. We paused, staring at the trees that looked like they belonged to a dream. While we stood there, I noticed something odd, a faint trail of small footprints leading away from the cluster. They were bare, like the girls had been, but fresh enough to suggest someone had passed through recently. My heart raced. Could she still be out here? Was she close? We followed the trail cautiously, moving deeper into the woods. The path twisted and turned, sometimes disappearing only to reappear again. The light grew dimmer, and the sense of being watched crept over me. Suddenly, my friend Sarah stopped and pointed ahead. There, sitting quietly on a fallen log, was a girl. She looked about 16 or 17, barefoot like the girl at the trailhead, with tangled hair and clothes that blended with the forest colors. She didn't speak at first, just stared at us with those same wide, searching eyes. When we offered her water and food, she shook her head and asked softly, "Have you seen the white trees?" It was her. We didn't know what to say. We sat down nearby, not wanting to scare her. She told us she had been walking for a long time, trying to find something she had lost. She spoke of the ocean and the forest as if they were alive, guiding her steps. Her story was fragmented, but full of strange wisdom. She said she was searching for a place where she could be safe, where the trees would protect her. She talked about the mist that came and the voices she heard in the wind. We realized she had been out here alone for a long time, surviving without help. Yet there was something more, something beyond just survival. It was like she belonged to the forest, part of it in a way that was both beautiful and heartbreaking. We wanted to take her back to town to get help, but she was hesitant. She said she couldn't stay in one place for long, that the forest called her back. Over the next few days, we brought her food and blankets, trying to build trust. She taught us about the forest, the plants that healed, the animals that watched, and the sacred white trees that held the key to her story. We learned that she didn't know her real name or where she came from. She only remembered the ocean and the trees. Her memories were like fragments of a dream, sometimes clear and sometimes fading. One night, she told us about a great storm that had come years ago, a disaster that changed everything. She said she was caught in it and lost her family and home. Since then, she had been wandering, searching for a way to belong again. Her story matched the accounts of a devastating flood that hit the Oregon coast decades earlier, uprooting communities and changing the landscape. Some people were never found, their stories lost to time. I thought about how the trail and the forest held pieces of history and mystery, and how the girl was living proof of that. As the days passed, I noticed something strange. The girl would disappear at times, vanishing into the forest without a sound, only to return with stories of places and creatures we couldn't see. She seemed connected to the land in a way none of us could explain. Sometimes, when she spoke of the white trees, her voice grew distant, and her eyes looked beyond us, as if she was seeing something we couldn't. It was both unsettling and mesmerizing. We realized that the girl was searching not just for a place, but for herself, her past, her identity, her peace. One afternoon, we decided to take her to the ranger station, hoping to find some help or answers. The rangers listened to her story quietly, nodding with a mix of sympathy and caution. One of them, an older man named Tom, spoke about the girl we had seen before, the one who showed up at the trailhead now and then. He said she had been appearing on the trail for years, always barefoot, always asking about the white trees. Tom said she was like a guardian or a lost soul tied to the land, a living mystery that no one could solve. Hearing that, I felt a mix of awe and sadness. The girl was more than just a person. She was part of the forest's story, woven into its shadows and light. We left the station with more questions than answers, but also with a sense of connection to something greater. That night, as we camped near the trailhead, I looked out toward the dark forest and whispered a hope that the girl would find what she was searching for. The Oregon Coast Trail had given us a glimpse of something beyond the ordinary, a story of loss, resilience, and the deep bond between people and the land. And I knew that I would never forget the girl who walked from the ocean and vanished into the white trees. After our visit to the ranger station, the strange connection between the girl and the forest grew stronger in my mind. It was like she was a part of the land itself, an echo of something older and deeper than we could easily understand. My friends and I tried to process everything we'd learned, but no simple explanation fit. She was more than just a lost teenager or a wandering soul. She carried the weight of the ocean, the storm, and the forest in her eyes. We decided to spend more time on the trail, hoping to understand her better and maybe find a way to help. Every day we visited the places where the white trees grew, walking slowly through the dense forest and listening to the sounds around us, the rustle of leaves, the call of birds, and the distant crash of waves on the shore. One afternoon, as the sunlight filtered through the branches, the girl led us to a hidden part of the forest. It was a small clearing surrounded by the pale white trees she had spoken of. The ground was soft with moss, and wildflowers grew in bright patches of color. There was a sense of peace there, like the world was holding its breath. She sat down on a fallen log and told us more of her story, or at least what she remembered. She said the forest was alive, and that the white trees were guardians, watching over everything. She believed they could guide her home or help her find what she had lost. Her voice was soft and full of longing. It was clear that this place was important to her, but also that she was afraid to stay too long. She said the forest could be both protector and captor, depending on how you treated it. We talked about her memories, fragmented as they were. She remembered the ocean's cold touch, the feeling of being swept away by a storm, and the sadness of losing her family. But she also spoke of moments of beauty, sunlight on water, the scent of pine needles, and the quiet companionship of the animals. I noticed that when she spoke of these things, her eyes shone with a mixture of hope and sorrow. It was like she was holding on to a thread of something precious, even as it slipped through her fingers. Over the next few days, we tried to make her feel safe. We brought food and blankets, and sometimes just sat quietly with her in the clearing, letting the forest's calm wash over us. We didn't push her to talk or explain. We just listened. One morning, while I was exploring nearby, I found something unexpected. Beneath a cluster of white trees, half buried in the moss, was a small, weathered box. It looked old and forgotten, covered in lichen and dirt. I called the others, and together we carefully opened it. Inside were a few items: a faded photograph of a family, a small carved figure of a bird, and a journal with worn pages. The handwriting was delicate and careful, and the words told a story of love, loss, and hope. The journal belonged to a woman who had lived near the coast decades ago. She wrote about the storms, the changing landscape, and her hope that her children would grow up safe and free. The last entries spoke of a great flood that swept through the area, separating families and reshaping lives. Reading the journal, I felt a deep connection to the girl and her story. It was as if this woman's words were a bridge to the past, a reminder of the lives touched by the land and the sea. We shared the journal with the girl, and for the first time she smiled, a small, genuine smile that lit up her face. She said the woman was probably her grandmother, and that the stories in the journal felt like whispers from her past. That moment felt like a breakthrough. We weren't just strangers anymore. We were part of a shared history, connected by loss and love. As the days passed, the girl's trust in us grew. She spoke more about the white trees and the ocean, about the voices she heard in the wind and the dreams that came to her at night. Sometimes she spoke of a path, a hidden way through the forest that could lead her home. We wanted to follow that path, to help her find peace and belonging. But the forest was tricky. One afternoon, as we walked along a narrow trail, the girl suddenly stopped and looked around with wide eyes. She said the forest was shifting, that it didn't want us to go further. We paused, listening to the silence around us. The air grew thick and still, and I felt a chill run down my spine. It was as if the forest was alive, watching us, deciding whether we belonged. The girl told us stories of others who had tried to follow the path but never returned. She said the forest was protective, but could be dangerous to those who didn't respect it. I realized that our journey was not just physical but spiritual. We were entering a world where nature and memory intertwined, where past and present met in the spaces between trees and shadows. That night, around the campfire, we talked about what we had seen and heard. We wondered if the girl was truly lost, or if she was a guardian herself, an echo of the past, a bridge between worlds. The idea was both comforting and unsettling. We knew that whatever her story was, it was tied to the land in a way none of us fully understood. In the days that followed, we continued to explore, to listen, and to learn. The girl became our guide, showing us the hidden beauty of the forest and the mysteries it held. She taught us to see the world with new eyes, to notice the small wonders, the way light danced on leaves, the patterns in the bark, and the songs carried by the wind. I began to understand that the white trees were not just physical places, but symbols of memory, loss, and hope. And the girl, with her quiet strength and gentle spirit, was a living reminder that some stories don't end, but continue to grow in the hearts of those who listen. One morning, as the sun rose over the misty coast, the girl stood at the edge of the clearing. She looked out toward the horizon, her face calm and resolute. She told us she was ready to follow the path, to find her place in the world. We didn't know where the path would lead or what awaited her, but we knew she was no longer alone. As she disappeared into the forest, I felt a mix of sadness and hope. The girl who walked from the ocean was part of the land, the trees, and the stories that shaped us all. And her journey, like the tide, would continue, sometimes hidden, sometimes seen, always moving forward. After the girl disappeared into the forest that morning, a strange silence settled over our group. We stood in the clearing, surrounded by the white trees, feeling the weight of what had just happened. It was as if she had been a part of the forest itself, and then simply returned to where she belonged. The sun filtered softly through the branches, casting long shadows across the mossy floor. There was peace in the air, but also a lingering sense of mystery. We knew that whatever path she had chosen, it was one tied to the land, to memories both ancient and deeply personal. The forest had kept its secrets well, but in those moments, I felt like I was glimpsing something timeless, something that connected people and place in ways that defied easy explanation. That day, we didn't rush back to town. Instead, we took our time walking the trail, absorbing the quiet beauty of the coast and the dense woods. The ocean's roar was a steady presence in the distance, grounding us to the wildness of the place. The salty air mixed with the earthy scent of pine and damp soil. It felt like the land itself was breathing, alive and watching. Later, back in the small town near the trailhead, I found myself drawn to the local library. I wanted to learn more about the history of the area, the storms, the communities, and the legends that might shed light on the girl and her connection to the white trees. The librarian was an older woman with kind eyes who seemed to understand why I was asking questions. She showed me old newspaper clippings and photographs, stories of the Great Flood decades ago, and accounts of people displaced or lost. There were articles about a storm that had changed the coastline forever, reshaping towns and forests alike. Some stories mentioned strange sightings of a girl wandering barefoot near the shore or the trailhead, always appearing and disappearing without explanation. These tales were whispered among locals, part fact, part legend, passed down through generations. I learned that the white alder trees were more than just a natural curiosity. For some of the native tribes in the region, they were sacred, believed to hold spirits and memories of ancestors. They were guardians of the land, protectors of those who traveled the forests and shores. This knowledge made me think about the girl in a new way. Maybe she wasn't just lost or broken, but was a part of the forest's spirit, a living reminder of its history and the people who had been touched by its power. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the girl's words, her search, and the stories of the land. The idea that the forest was alive in a way that went beyond the physical world was both comforting and unsettling. I wondered what it meant for her future and for ours. The next day, I returned to the trailhead with my friends. We wanted to leave something behind, a mark that said we cared, that we remembered. We gathered stones from the shore, and arranged them carefully near the welcome sign, creating a small cairn. It was a simple gesture, but felt important, a way to honor the girl and the forest that had held her. As we worked, I noticed a figure watching us from the edge of the trees. It was a man, tall and weathered, with eyes that seemed to carry the weight of many years. He introduced himself as a ranger who had worked on the trail for decades. He told us stories of hikers and travelers who had encountered the girl over the years. Sometimes she appeared lost, sometimes calm and knowing, but she was always there, a part of the trail's living history. The ranger said the girl was a mystery to everyone, a symbol of the forest's power to heal and protect, but also to challenge those who entered its depths. He warned us to respect the land and its stories, and to remember that some paths were not meant to be forced or hurried. We listened carefully, grateful for his wisdom. It felt like we were part of a larger story, one that stretched beyond our own lives and experiences. Over the following weeks, the girl remained on my mind. I started writing down everything: the encounters, the stories, the feelings. I wanted to hold on to the memory of her and the lessons she had shared. I realized that sometimes the most powerful stories were not the ones with clear beginnings or endings, but those that lived in the questions and the spaces between. One evening, as I sat by a campfire near the coast, I thought about the white trees and the ocean, about the girl who walked from the sea and vanished into the forest. I understood then that her story was not just about loss or searching. It was about connection between people and place, past and present, seen and unseen. The forest, the ocean, and the girl were threads in the same tapestry, woven together by time and memory. As the fire crackled and the stars appeared above, I felt a quiet hope. Maybe the girl had found her place among the white trees, or maybe her journey was still unfolding. Whatever the future held, I knew her story had changed me. It had opened my eyes to the mysteries around us and the power of the land to hold and heal. I promised myself to keep listening, to keep learning, and to never forget the girl we found at the trailhead. She was more than a memory or a mystery. She was a reminder that some journeys are not about finding answers, but about embracing the unknown and the wonder that comes with it. The forest will always hold her story, and now, so will I. In the weeks that followed, the story of the girl and the white trees became something of a quiet presence in our lives. We went back to our routines, but that forest, that trail, and that strange barefoot girl lingered in my thoughts like a half-remembered dream. The more I tried to move on, the more it felt like the land itself was calling me back. I started to see the coast differently, noticing things I had never paid attention to before: the way the light shifted through the branches, the pattern of waves crashing against the rocks, the subtle sounds that carried on the wind. One afternoon, feeling restless, I decided to return alone to the white trees. I wanted to understand more, to feel that connection again. The forest was quiet, but alive in its own way. The soft rustling of leaves, the distant cry of seabirds, and the faint scent of salt and earth filled the air. I walked slowly, my footsteps muffled by the thick moss and fallen needles. As I reached the clearing, I saw something new: a small pile of smooth stones arranged carefully at the base of one of the pale trees. It wasn't there before, at least not when we had been last. I touched the stones lightly and noticed a faded ribbon tied around a branch above it. The ribbon was soft and worn, its color faded to a pale blue, like something left behind long ago. I sat down nearby and closed my eyes, letting the quiet wash over me. Memories of the girl's face, her questions about the white trees, and her stories of the ocean floated through my mind. It was as if she had left me a message, a sign that she was still here in some way, part of the forest's heartbeat. Over the next few days, I kept coming back, and each time I found something new. A feather caught in the branches, a pattern of broken twigs on the ground, a single wildflower blooming out of season. These small things felt like whispers, pieces of a story I was still piecing together. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned shades of pink and orange, I heard a sound that made me freeze. It was a soft whistle, clear and haunting, carried by the breeze through the trees. I knew it was the same whistle the girl had made when we first found her two short, sharp notes that seemed to call across the forest. I called out softly, not expecting a response, but hoping. For a moment the forest was silent again, and then the whistle came back, this time 3 times, closer and more insistent. My heart pounded, and I felt a mixture of fear and awe. I waited, watching the shadows, but saw nothing. Still, I knew she was near, watching, waiting. I told my friends about the whistles when I returned, and together we planned another visit. This time, we wanted to find her, to understand more about the connection between her, the white trees, and the ocean. We prepared carefully, bringing food, blankets, and a small notebook to write down everything. The hike back to the clearing was quieter than before, each of us lost in thought. The weight of the unknown hung between us, but also a sense of purpose. When we arrived, the clearing was bathed in the golden light of late afternoon. The pale trees stood tall and silent, their bark almost glowing in the fading sun. We settled around the cairn of stones, waiting and listening. The air was cool, and the scent of the sea was stronger here. The forest seemed to hold its breath. As twilight deepened, the soft whistle returned, weaving through the trees like a song. We followed the sound, moving slowly and carefully along a narrow path the girl had once shown us. The trail led us deeper into the forest than before, to a small hidden cove where the ocean met the land in a quiet embrace. Waves lapped gently against the shore, and the sky was streaked with stars. There, sitting on a rock near the water, was the girl. She looked as if she had been waiting for us, her eyes reflecting the moonlight and the vastness of the sea. She smiled softly but didn't speak at first. We sat down beside her, feeling the cool breeze and the steady rhythm of the waves. She told us that the ocean was part of her story, the place where she began and the place she longed to return to. She spoke of the storm that had changed everything, and of the white trees that held memories like a living book. Her voice was calm but filled with a deep sadness. She said she had been searching for a way to heal, to find peace in a world that had been broken for her. We listened, understanding that her journey was far from over. The forest and ocean were both home and prison, places of beauty and loss intertwined. As the night wore on, she shared a secret. There was a place where the white trees grew thickest, where the veil between worlds was thinnest. It was a place where she could rest but also be free. We promised to help her find it, to walk the path together. The next days were a mix of hope and challenge. The forest tested us with tangled undergrowth, sudden storms, and the weight of silence. But the girl guided us, her presence steady and sure. Along the way, we discovered more about the land's history, stories of families lost to the floods, communities rebuilt, and spirits that lingered like shadows in the mist. We found signs left by others, carvings in bark, stones stacked in patterns, and faded ribbons tied to branches. These were marks of people who had walked the trail before us, searching for answers or connection. The journey became a shared experience, weaving our stories with the forest's ancient ones. One evening we reached the heart of the white trees, a grove so dense and pale it seemed otherworldly. The air here was thick with silence and possibility. The girl stood quietly, her eyes closed, as if listening to a song only she could hear. Then she opened her eyes and looked at us, her expression peaceful. She said this was the place she had been seeking, the place where she could finally rest and remember. We sat with her as the sun set, the light fading to twilight. The forest around us seemed to breathe, alive with memories and secrets. In that moment, I felt a deep connection to the girl, to the land, and to the stories that shape us all. Her journey had touched something timeless, a reminder that even in loss, there is hope, and even in silence, there is story. As we made our way back to the trailhead, I knew that the girl who walked from the ocean was no longer lost. She was part of the forest, the white trees, and the sea. And her story would live on, whispered in the wind and carried by the waves. The day we reached the heart of the white trees felt like crossing a threshold into something sacred. The grove was unlike anything I had ever seen, a cluster of ancient pale trunks stretching upward, their branches intertwining so tightly that only soft, diffused light filtered through. The air was thick and cool, smelling faintly of salt and moss, and an almost tangible stillness settled over everything. The girl stood in the center of the grove, barefoot and calm, her eyes scanning the space as if it held memories she had been waiting years to uncover. I remember feeling both awe and a kind of gentle sorrow, knowing this place was deeply tied to her, and maybe to the land's own story of loss and endurance. We all gathered quietly around her, the forest seeming to hold its breath. She spoke softly about how this grove was where the ocean's sorrow met the forest's strength, a place where stories ended, but also began. The white trees, she said, were keepers of those stories, standing guard over the memories of people, storms, and time itself. Her voice trembled when she talked about the storm that had changed her life, the floodwaters that came like a wall, sweeping away homes, families, and futures. She remembered being separated from her family in that chaos, caught between water and wood, and losing everything she had known. That loss had become part of the forest and sea, and part of her too. But this grove, she said, was a place where she could finally lay down her burdens, where the trees would hold her story with care, and where she could find rest. We spent hours there, sitting among the white trunks, listening to the soft hum of the forest and the distant murmur of the ocean. There was no need for words. The space itself spoke of healing and grace. As twilight deepened, the girl stood and moved slowly to the base of a large tree, whose bark shimmered almost like it was glowing from within. She pressed her palm against the trunk and closed her eyes. For a long moment, she was still, and then a faint smile touched her lips. She told us that the tree had accepted her story, that it would carry her memories and protect her, that the forest was a place of endings and beginnings, and that she was ready to become part of that cycle. I watched her, feeling a mix of gratitude and sadness. We had helped her find this place, but it was also a goodbye. Before she left, she turned to us and said something that stayed with me. Some of us walk between worlds, not lost, but searching. The forest remembers those who listen, and the ocean sings for those who care. She stepped away from the tree and began to walk deeper into the grove. With every step, she seemed to blend with the light and shadows until she was no longer visible. The silence that followed was profound. It felt as though the forest itself had closed around her, holding her safely in its embrace. We stayed there a while longer, each of us processing what had happened. It was hard to grasp that someone who had felt so real could simply become part of the land like that, but it made sense in a way that was both beautiful and heartbreaking. Eventually, we made our way back through the forest, the white trees standing tall and silent behind us. The path felt different now, like a thread connecting past and present, loss and hope. Back at the trailhead, the welcome sign looked the same but carried a new meaning. The small cairn we had built before remained, surrounded now by wildflowers and fresh stones left by other hikers who sensed something special here. In the weeks and months that followed, the story of the girl became a quiet legend shared among those who walked the Oregon Coast Trail. People spoke of the white trees and the spirit who walked barefoot by the ocean, a guardian of memory and loss. I often returned to the trail, sometimes alone, sometimes with friends, always feeling a sense of connection to the land and to the story that had touched my life so deeply. The girl's journey was a reminder that some stories do not have neat endings. They live on in the spaces between trees, in the rhythm of the waves, and in the hearts of those who remember. Her presence taught me to listen to the land, to the past, and to the quiet voices carried by the wind. Life along the coast continued with its rhythms of storm and calm, loss and renewal. But for me, the trail and the white trees became a place of reflection and gratitude, a place where the ordinary and the extraordinary met. And somewhere deep in the forest, I believe the girl found her peace, held forever in the gentle arms of the white trees.